Welcome back to Wild Alpha Tales. Before we dive into tonight's tale of shattered hearts and impossible love, take a second to howl at that like button and join our pack by subscribing. Trust me, you'll want to be here for every heartbeat of this journey. Now let the moon rise and let this story begin. Chapter 1. The Sanctuary of Shattered Souls. The sanctuary reeked of cedar smoke and bitter resignation. I pressed myself against the cold stone wall, making my body as small as possible while the other Omegas clustered near the fire like moths drawn to flame. Their laughter was sharp, performative, each one jockeying for position even here, even among the forgotten. My name is Vesper Winters. I'm 21 years old, and I've been broken for precisely 2 years, 3 months, and 14 days. The day my alpha rejected me, he looked at me with such disgust it had burned itself into my memory like a brand. Too soft, too weak, too useless to carry on our bloodline. His words had been a death sentence delivered with casual cruelty. I'd arrived at this sanctuary hollow, a ghost wearing skin. I'd learned to be invisible here. It was safer that way. Did you hear? Talia's voice cut through the murmur of conversation like a blade. She stood at the center of our ragtag group, red hair cascading over her shoulders like spilled blood, green eyes glittering with barely contained excitement. The Alpha King is coming. Tomorrow. Here. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, excited whispers, nervous laughter that didn't quite mask the undercurrent of fear. My stomach dropped like a stone into dark water. Why would he come here? Odette asked, her voice thin and reedy. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She never slept well. None of us did. This is a sanctuary for rejects. Exactly. Talia's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. His son, the PUP. Apparently, he's been through 17 caregivers in 6 months. Nannies, tutors, even trained specialists from the capital. She paused for dramatic effect, clearly relishing the attention. No one can handle him. They're getting desperate. My heart hammered against my ribs. The Alpha King. Everyone knew the stories, ruthless, powerful, a widower who'd lost his mate 3 years ago and hadn't been the same since. They said grief had turned him to ice, that he ruled with an iron fist and felt nothing at all anymore. His son, born just months before the Queen's death, was rumored to be impossible, dangerous, violent, even for one so young. They're looking for someone here, Rhea said slowly, realization dawning on her face. One of us. Where else would they look? Talia's laugh was bitter as the winter wind. We're expendable. If the PUP hurts one of us, if things go wrong, well, who's going to complain about a rejected Omega? The words landed like stones thrown into still water, ripples of uncomfortable truth spreading through the room. No one argued. We all knew she was right. I turned away, moving toward the window where condensation gathered on the glass in crystalline patterns. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, blanketing the world in white. The sanctuary sat at the edge of the kingdom, far enough from the capital that we could be forgotten. Most of us preferred it that way. My reflection stared back at me from the window. Pale, insubstantial, forgettable. Light brown hair fell around a face that had been called pretty once, before my pack alpha had looked at me and seen only weakness. The memory still stung like salt in an open wound. They'll probably pick Talia, someone was saying. She's the strongest here. Or Rhea. She used to work with pups before. I let their speculation fade into background noise, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. Tomorrow, the Alpha King would arrive, and he would choose someone to care for his damaged son. It wouldn't be me. It was never me. And that was fine. I didn't want to be chosen, didn't want those assessing eyes landing on me, seeing right through to all the broken parts I'd tried so hard to hide. The evening wore on. I helped prepare dinner in the kitchen, grateful for the excuse to avoid the increasingly frenzied conversation in the main hall. By the time I retreated to my small room on the 3rd floor, my hands were shaking with exhaustion I couldn't quite name. I lay awake for hours, watching shadows dance across the ceiling, listening to the old building settle around me. Somewhere below, I could still hear voices, planning, scheming, hoping. Always hoping that this time, this opportunity, would be the one to change everything. I'd stopped hoping a long time ago. Sleep came eventually, fitful and thin, full of dreams I couldn't quite remember, but that left me gasping awake in the dark hours before dawn. Morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of winter day that seemed to leach color from the world. I dressed carefully in my least worn dress, still shabby, but clean, and braided my hair with trembling fingers. Presentation matters, the headmistress always said. Even for the discarded. Especially for the discarded. The main hall had been transformed overnight. Someone had scrubbed the windows until they gleamed, arranged chairs in precise rows, even put out flowers, hothouse roses that must have cost more than my monthly rations. The other Omegas were already assembled, each one groomed and positioned like pieces on a chessboard. I took a seat in the back row, hoping to disappear. Straighten up, the headmistress hissed as she passed, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Show some dignity. Dignity? As if any of us had that left. The sound of engines broke through the morning quiet. Large vehicles, multiple, coming up the long drive. My pulse kicked up despite my best efforts to remain calm. This was really happening. The doors burst open, and a blast of frigid air swept through the hall, carrying with it the scent of pine and something darker, heavier. Power. Authority. The kind that made every Omega instinct in my body scream to lower my eyes, to submit, to make myself smaller. The Alpha King entered first. I'd expected someone older, harder. What I saw instead stole the breath from my lungs. He moved like violence barely contained, all lean muscle and controlled grace. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, though he couldn't have been older than 35. His face was carved from stone, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, lips pressed into a line that suggested he'd forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that truly arrested me. Storm gray, cold as winter sky, assessing. The eyes of someone who'd seen too much and felt too little. He swept his gaze across the assembled Omegas with the dispassion of someone evaluating livestock. Behind him came two guards, both built like walls. And between them, my breath caught. The pup couldn't have been more than 3 years old, but he moved with an aggression that seemed impossible for someone so small. His hair was the same dark shade as his father's, wild and uncombed. His eyes were already cold, already calculating in a way that made my chest ache. He wore clothes that had probably been expensive once, but were now torn and stained. As I watched, he lunged at one of the guards, tiny teeth bared. The man barely managed to catch him without getting bitten. Enough, Caspin. The Alpha King's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute command. The pup stilled immediately, going rigid in the guard's arms. But the rage didn't leave his small face. It was heartbreaking and terrifying in equal measure, a child who'd learned that violence was the only language anyone understood. The headmistress stepped forward, all false warmth and obsequious smiles. Your Majesty, we are honored by your presence. As you can see, we have assembled our most capable. I'll choose myself. He cut her off without ceremony, already moving down the first row of Omegas. I watched him pause before Talia, saw the way she straightened, practically preening under his attention. He studied her for a long moment, then moved on without a word. Ria received the same treatment. Then Odette. One by one, he evaluated and dismissed them, his expression never changing. The pup, Caspin, had gone eerily quiet, watching his father with an intensity that made my chest ache. Even in his rage, he was trying to understand, trying to anticipate. The Alpha King moved through the rows with methodical precision. With each rejection, the tension in the room ratcheted higher. The Omegas he passed began to shift uncomfortably, confusion and hurt flickering across their faces. He was getting closer to the back row. Closer to me. Every instinct screamed at me to look away, to avoid drawing his attention. But some perverse curiosity, or maybe just exhaustion with hiding, made me raise my eyes as he approached. The world seemed to narrow to just that moment. His gaze met mine across the distance of 3 rows. Something flickered in those gray depths. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. Or nothing at all.
He stopped walking.
The silence stretched, pregnant with possibility and dread. I couldn't look away now. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then Caspian made a sound. Not quite a whimper. Not quite a growl. And twisted in the guard's arms to see what had captured his father's attention. His eyes, so cold and hostile just moments before, locked onto mine. And something impossible happened. The pup went completely still. His small body relaxed for the first time since he'd entered the hall. His expression shifted, softened, became something achingly vulnerable. He reached out one small hand in my direction, fingers grasping at empty air like I was water, and he was dying of thirst. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed. He started walking again, but this time he was coming straight toward me, parting the rows of omegas like a ship through dark water. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. He stopped directly in front of me, so close I could see the faint scar along his jaw, smell the winter and pine that clung to his clothes. Up close, he was even more overwhelming. Not just physically, though he towered over me, but in the sheer force of presence that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a forge. Stand. My legs obeyed before my mind could catch up. Suddenly I was face to face with him, or would have been if I'd been brave enough to keep my eyes raised. Instead, I focused on the third button of his coat, noting absently that it was silver, that his coat was military cut, that I was definitely about to pass out. Look at me. The command in his voice was undeniable. I raised my eyes slowly, fighting every Omega instinct that screamed this was wrong, this was dangerous, this was... His expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had. Some flicker of what? Interest? Assessment? What's your name? His voice was softer now, though no less commanding. Vesper. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Vesper Winters, Your Majesty. He studied me for another long moment, and I felt stripped bare under that gaze, as if he could see every weakness, every fear, every secret I'd tried to bury. Then he turned to the guard holding his son. Bring him here. The guard approached cautiously. I finally got a clear look at Caspian up close, small for his age, painfully thin. His clothes hung on a frame that should have been soft with baby fat but was instead all sharp angles. But it was his eyes that truly broke my heart. Ancient eyes in a child's face. Eyes that had seen pain and loss and hadn't yet learned that the world could be anything else. He was still reaching toward me, with that same desperate gesture. May I? I asked softly, not sure if I was addressing the Alpha King or his son, or both. The king nodded once, sharp, economical. I extended my hand slowly, carefully, the way you might approach a wounded animal. Caspian practically launched himself from the guard's arms into mine. Small hands fisted in my dress. His face pressed against my shoulder with a force that spoke of desperation. He didn't bite, didn't growl, didn't fight. He just held on like I was the only solid thing in a world that had never stopped spinning. I felt tears prick at my eyes as I carefully wrapped my arms around him, supporting his slight weight. He was shaking. Or maybe I was. It was hard to tell where I ended, and he began at that moment.
How?
The Alpha King's voice was rough, raw in a way that suggested this single word cost him something. I shook my head slightly, unable to answer. I didn't know. I didn't know why this broken child had chosen me, why he'd finally gone still in the arms of the weakest, most rejected Omega in the room. But I knew with a certainty that terrified me that nothing would ever be the same. The Alpha King stared at us for a long moment. I could feel the weight of every eye in the hall boring into my back. Then he spoke, and his words sealed my fate. You'll come back to the capital with us. Today. Chapter 2. Into the Obsidian Throne. The journey to the capital took 6 hours through winterlocked wilderness, and Caspian didn't let go of me once. He'd fallen asleep within the first 20 minutes, his small body finally surrendering to exhaustion now that he'd found whatever it was he'd been searching for. I sat in the back of the massive vehicle, far more luxurious than anything I'd ever experienced, all black leather and polished wood, with a sleeping child in my lap and the Alpha King sitting across from us, watching with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I kept my eyes on Caspin, studying the delicate features that were softer in sleep. Dark lashes fanned across pale cheeks. His breathing had finally evened out into something peaceful. One small hand still clutched my dress, even in unconsciousness, as if afraid I might disappear. He hasn't slept through the night in 2 years. The Alpha King's voice startled me, quiet as it was. I looked up cautiously, meeting those storm-gray eyes. The doctors say it's trauma. Night terrors. He wakes up screaming every few hours. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Nothing helps. Not medicine, not comfort, not. He trailed off, and I heard the unspoken words. Not me. I can't help him. I'm sorry, I said softly, not sure what else to offer in the face of such raw pain. Don't apologize. He leaned back against the seat, still watching us with that unnerving focus. Tell me about yourself, Vesper Winters. The headmistress's records were sparse. Of course they were. No one wanted to document the details of rejection, the reasons why someone had been cast aside like refuse. There isn't much to tell, Your Majesty. I'm 21. I've been at the sanctuary for 2 years. I hesitated, then added quietly, my former pack alpha found me inadequate. Too weak to be of use. Something flickered across his face. Anger, maybe, or disgust. Inadequate, he repeated, the word sharp on his tongue. Yet you're the first person my son has willingly touched in over a year. The weight of that statement settled over me like a heavy cloak.
A year.
This child had been so lost in his pain that he'd rejected all comfort, all connection, for an entire year. The last caregiver lasted 3 days, he continued, his voice taking on a clinical tone, as if reciting a military report. Before that, 5 days. The one before that made it 2 weeks, but only because she sedated him against my explicit orders. His jaw clenched. I fired her immediately. I looked down at Caspian's sleeping face, imagining the parade of strangers who'd tried and failed to reach him. Each one another abandonment, another confirmation that he was too broken to be loved. What happened to his mother? The temperature in the vehicle seemed to drop 10 degrees. The Alpha King's expression went carefully blank, but not before I caught a flash of something raw and devastating in his eyes. That, he said quietly, is not a story for today. I nodded, understanding I'd touched something too painful to examine in the light. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. You'll be staying in the royal quarters, he interrupted, changing the subject with the finality of someone who'd had a lifetime of practice controlling conversations. Sebastian's room connects to a suite that will be yours. You'll have access to anything you need. Clothes, supplies, whatever you require. I don't need much, Your Majesty. That wasn't a negotiation. There was no hostility in his tone, just a statement of fact. You're not a servant. You're not here to be invisible or to make yourself small. You're here because my son needs you, and that makes you one of the most important people in this kingdom. Do you understand? I didn't.
Not really.
But I nodded anyway, because what else could I do? The landscape outside began to change as we approached the capital. Rolling hills gave way to larger estates, then to the sprawling city itself. Even through the tinted windows, I could see the grandeur of it. Stone buildings that reached toward the sky, streets bustling with activity despite the cold, markets and shops and the general chaos of thousands of lives intersecting. The royal complex sat at the heart of it all, a massive structure of gray stone and soaring towers that had stood for centuries. It looked less like a palace and more like a fortress, built to withstand sieges both physical and metaphorical. Guards lined the approach, snapping to attention as our vehicle passed. I felt suddenly, acutely aware of how out of place I was, how impossible this all seemed. A rejected Omega in the royal quarters. What were they thinking? We pulled into a private courtyard, and within moments, staff appeared, more people than I'd ever seen in one place, all of them moving with practiced efficiency to open doors and assist with whatever it was that staff assisted with. Let me take him, the Alpha King said, reaching for Caspin. The moment his father's hands touched him, Caspian's eyes flew open. For a heartbeat, I saw pure panic cross his small face. And then he was fighting, thrashing with surprising strength for someone so small, a wounded animal caught in a trap.
No.
No, no, no. His voice rose to a shriek. Don't want you. I want her. I saw the Alpha King's face go carefully expressionless, but not before pain flickered across it. There and gone, but undeniable. The look of a father whose son couldn't bear his touch. It's okay, I said quickly, adjusting my hold to support Caspian better. I've got him. It's okay. Caspian buried his face against my shoulder again, his small body rigid with distress. The Alpha King stepped back, and for just a moment, I saw him clearly. Not a terrifying monarch or an all-powerful alpha, but a father whose son flinched from his embrace. This way. His voice was flat now, emotionless. I followed him through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, each more opulent than the last. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of past rulers, I assumed, all of them staring down with the same cool authority. Staff members we passed pressed themselves against the walls, eyes downcast. I realized with a start that they were all Omegas. Every single one. Finally, we reached a set of double doors that the king pushed open to reveal a suite of rooms that took my breath away. The main chamber was larger than the entire third floor of the sanctuary, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, and warmth that spoke of fires already lit and rooms prepared. Caspian's room is through there. The king indicated a door to the left. Yours is the opposite. There's a connecting bathroom, and the nursery playroom is down the hall. He looked at his son, still clinging to me, and something in his expression cracked, just slightly, just enough for me to see the exhaustion and heartbreak beneath. Make him comfortable. That's all I ask. Then he turned and left, the doors closing behind him with a soft click that felt like finality. I stood in the middle of that enormous room with a traumatized child in my arms and no idea what I was supposed to do next. Hey, I whispered to Caspian. Want to see your room? He nodded against my shoulder, still not letting go. His room was exactly what I'd expected and nothing like it at the same time. Yes, there were toys. Hundreds of them, probably, and a bed that looked like something from a fairy tale, carved from dark wood with posts that reached toward the ceiling. The walls were painted with murals of forests and stars, beautiful and lifeless. But there was also a darkness to it, a sense of disuse. The toys were pristine, untouched. The bed looked like it had never been slept in, covers still perfectly arranged. This was a room designed for a child, but no child actually lived here. Where do you usually sleep? I asked softly. Caspian finally lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. He pointed to the closet. My heart broke a little more. I carried him to the closet and opened it carefully. Inside, someone had made a nest of blankets on the floor, tucked into the darkest corner. It was small and cramped and probably felt safe in a way that big, open room never could. Okay, I said gently. That's okay. We all need our safe places. I settled onto the floor beside the nest, arranging Caspian in my lap. He relaxed immediately, that same desperate relief flooding through him. I'm Vesper, I told him quietly. And I'm going to stay right here with you for as long as you need me. Promise. His voice was so small, so broken, the voice of a child who'd been promised things before and seen those promises shatter. I promise. He studied my face in the dim light filtering through the closet door, searching for something. Whatever he found must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly and closed his eyes. I must have dozed off, because I woke to find the room dark except for a night light that cast soft shadows across the walls. Caspian was still asleep, and I was stiff from sitting on the floor for hours. Carefully, so carefully, I tried to shift him onto the blankets of his nest. His eyes opened immediately, panic flooding his small face. I'm here, I said quickly, my hand on his shoulder. I'm right here. I'm not leaving. He grabbed my hand with both of his, holding tight. Promise. I promise. I'm just going to lie down next to you, okay? I'm not going anywhere. I managed to maneuver myself into the nest beside him, and he immediately curled into my side like a small animal seeking warmth. Within moments, his breathing evened out again. I lay there in the darkness of a closet in the royal quarters, holding a broken child who'd somehow decided I was worth trusting, and tried not to think about how badly this could all go wrong. How I was a rejected Omega with no training, no experience, and no idea how to heal wounds this deep. How the Alpha King was watching, assessing, waiting for me to fail like all the others. How Caspian's desperate grip on my hand felt like the weight of the entire world. Outside the closet, beyond the suite, the capital city continued its endless dance of life and death and everything in between. But here, in this small dark space, time seemed to slow. For the first time in 2 years, I felt needed. For the first time in his short, painful life, Caspian slept without screaming. And somewhere in the palace, the Alpha King stood alone in his study, staring out at his kingdom, wondering if a rejected Omega with gentle eyes might succeed where 17 others had failed. Wondering if hope was a luxury he could afford to feel again. Chapter 3. Garden of Memories. The next morning arrived with soft light filtering through the crack in the closet door. Caspian was already awake, watching me with those ancient eyes that had seen far too much for someone so young. "Hi," I said softly, my voice rough with sleep. "Hi." His voice was clearer than it had been yesterday, less raw. "Are you hungry?" He considered this for a long moment, as if the question required deep contemplation, then nodded slowly. "Okay. Let's see what we can find." I emerged from the closet to discover that someone had left a tray of food on the table in the main room while we slept. Fresh fruit arranged in careful patterns, pastries that looked like works of art, juice in crystal glasses, things that looked like they'd been chosen specifically for a child, though I suspected Caspian rarely ate any of it. There was also clothing laid out on the chair near the window. Simple, comfortable things in my size, far better quality than anything I'd owned before. The fabric was soft between my fingers, expensive in a way I couldn't quite process. The bathroom was a revelation, all white marble and gold fixtures, with a tub large enough to swim in and mirrors that seemed to multiply the light until the entire space glowed. I helped Caspian wash his face and hands, noting the way he flinched when I reached for him too quickly, how he watched the door as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. We ate breakfast in comfortable silence, and I noticed he kept glancing at me as if checking to make sure I was still real, still there. "What do you usually do during the day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and conversational. He shrugged, picking at a pastry, without actually eating much of it. "Nothing. Stay in my room. They try to make me do lessons, but I don't wanna." "What if we did something different today? Just you and me?" Suspicion flickered across his face like a candle flame in the wind. "Like what?" "I don't know yet." "What do you like?" Another shrug, but this one seemed more helpless than defiant. I realized with a pang that he probably didn't know what he liked. He'd been too busy surviving, too consumed by grief and rage, to discover preferences. A knock at the door made us both jump. Caspian's hand immediately found mine, squeezing tight enough that I felt my bones shift. "Come in," I called, trying to keep my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled back in an efficient bun. She wore the clothes of senior staff, and her eyes, though kind, were assessing in a way that made me feel like I was being measured for something. "Miss Winters, I'm Maya, head of the royal household." Her voice was crisp, professional. "I've come to brief you on the daily schedule and introduce you to the rest of Caspian's care team." "Care team?" I looked down at Caspian, who'd pressed himself against my side. "I thought it was just me." "Well, yes, you're the primary caregiver now, but there are still tutors, doctors, specialists."
No.
Caspian's voice was firm, final, ringing with an authority that shouldn't have existed in someone so small. "Just Vesper. No one else." Maya's lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Master Caspian, your father has hired the best educators and physicians in the kingdom. These people are here to help." "I don't care." His grip on my hand tightened until I could feel my pulse against his palm. Just Vesper. I don't want anyone else. I looked at Maya, trying to find some diplomatic middle ground that wouldn't undermine the king's authority, but also wouldn't shatter the fragile trust Caspian had placed in me. Perhaps we could start with just the two of us for a few days, I suggested carefully. Let him adjust to the change, to being here, then gradually introduce others when he's ready. Maya looked doubtful, her mouth twisting slightly as if she'd tasted something sour. I'll inform His Majesty of the arrangement. Though I suspect he won't be pleased. She paused at the door, turning back with something that might have been sympathy in her eyes. He's asked to see you both this afternoon, by the way. In his study. 2 o'clock sharp. After she left, I felt Caspian relax slightly against me, the tension bleeding out of his small frame like air from a punctured bladder. You didn't let them make me, he said quietly, looking up at me with something like wonder in his eyes. Make you what? Do things I don't want. Everyone always makes me do things. I knelt down so we were at eye level, my hands on his thin shoulders. Caspian, I'm not here to make you do anything. I'm here to help you feel safe. And sometimes that means saying no to other people, even if they think they know what's best. His eyes widened slightly, as if this concept was entirely foreign to him. The idea that someone might choose his comfort over authority, his needs over convenience. But I continued gently, sometimes I might ask you to try things that are hard. Not because I want to make you do them, but because I think they might help. And you can always tell me if something feels wrong. Always. Do you understand? He studied me for a long moment, those ancient eyes searching my face for lies or hidden cruelty. Finally, he nodded slowly. Okay. We spent the morning exploring his rooms, and I began to understand the scope of what I'd agreed to. This child had everything money could buy and nothing he actually needed. Every toy was educational, carefully selected by experts who'd never met him. Every book was age-appropriate and approved. Every piece of furniture was safe and tested and utterly devoid of personality. What if we made this room yours? I suggested, gesturing to the pristine space that felt more like a museum than a home. Really yours? Caspian looked around as if seeing the space for the first time. What do you mean? Well, what would you want it to look like? What makes you feel happy or calm or safe? He thought about this, his small face scrunching in concentration. It was clear no one had ever asked him before what he wanted, what he needed, what would make this place feel like home instead of a beautiful prison. Stories, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I like stories. When someone tells me stories. His expression crumpled slightly. Before Mom died, she used to tell me stories every night. There it was. The wound at the center of everything. The loss that had shattered this small person before he'd had a chance to become whole. What kind of stories did she tell? I asked gently, sitting down beside him on the floor. About brave people. People who were scared but did things anyway. His voice dropped to a whisper. She said I was brave too. But I'm not. I'm just scared all the time. My throat tightened with emotion. Caspian. Being scared and being brave aren't opposites. Brave people are scared, they just don't let the fear stop them from doing what needs to be done. He was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then, will you tell me stories? Like she did. Every night, I promised, gathering him into my arms. As many as you want. By the time 2 o'clock arrived, my stomach was in knots. Facing the Alpha King in his study felt like walking into a lion's den, especially now that I'd essentially dismissed his carefully chosen team of experts on my first full day. But Caspian's hand in mine gave me courage I didn't know I possessed. The study was all dark wood and leather, books lining every wall from floor to ceiling. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface covered with papers and maps and what looked like military reports. The Alpha King stood at the window, looking out over the city, and didn't turn when we entered. Your Majesty, I said softly. We're here. He turned slowly, and I was struck again by the exhaustion etched into his face, the lines around his eyes, the tightness in his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible burdens. His eyes went immediately to Caspian, and I saw the flicker of pain when his son pressed closer to me instead of running to him. Maya tells me you've dismissed the care team. His voice was neutral, carefully controlled, but I heard the question underneath, the doubt, the concern, maybe even anger. Not dismissed, Your Majesty. Delayed. Caspian needs time to adjust before. What Caspian needs, he interrupted, his voice hardening, is structure.
Routine.
Professional care from people who know what they're doing, not some. He stopped himself, but the words hung in the air between us anyway. Not some rejected Omega with no training. Something in me sparked at that. A flare of protective anger I hadn't felt in years, dormant embers suddenly catching flame. With respect, Your Majesty, what Caspian needs is to feel safe. And right now, a parade of strangers trying to fix him makes him feel the opposite of safe. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed dangerously, storm clouds gathering. I realized I'd just contradicted the most powerful man in the kingdom, challenged his authority in his own study. Every instinct screamed at me to back down, to submit, to apologize and beg forgiveness. But Caspian's hand tightened in mine, and I held my ground. For a long moment, the king just stared at me, and I could feel the weight of his dominance pressing down like a physical force, the air itself growing heavier. My knees wanted to buckle. My wolf wanted to bare her throat in submission. I locked my knees and kept my eyes level with his. Then, unexpectedly, his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something that might have been respect flickering in those gray depths. You have 3 weeks, he said finally. Show me that your approach works, that he's improving, sleeping better, eating properly, learning to manage his emotions. If I don't see real progress, we do things my way. Understood? That's fair, I said, though my heart was hammering. Is it? A hint of dark humor touched his voice. I don't recall asking your opinion on what's fair, Miss Winters. Heat flooded my cheeks, but before I could apologize, Caspian spoke up, his small voice defiant in the heavy silence. Vesper's right. The Alpha King's attention snapped to his son, surprise flickering across his face like lightning in a dark sky. I don't want the other people, Caspian continued, his voice stronger now. They're mean. Mean? The king's brow furrowed. Caspian, no one has been mean to you. These are professionals I've personally vetted. They're mean inside, Caspian insisted, and there was something heartbreaking about the certainty in his voice. They smile, but they don't mean it. They just want me to be quiet and go away so they can get paid and leave. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. The king looked at me, and I saw the question in his eyes. Is this true? Have I been so blind? Children can sense insincerity, Your Majesty, I said quietly. Sometimes better than adults. They can feel when someone's going through the motions versus when someone genuinely cares. He nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression, a crack in the armor, perhaps. A glimpse of the man beneath the crown. 3 weeks, Miss Winters. His voice was softer now, but no less firm. Make them count. As we left the study, I felt the magnitude of what I'd taken on settle over me like a heavy cloak. 3 weeks to heal a broken child. 3 weeks to prove that softness wasn't weakness, that being rejected didn't make me inadequate. 3 weeks to do the impossible. Caspian looked up at me as we walked back through the endless corridors toward our suite. You weren't scared of him. I was terrified, I admitted. But you didn't show it. He squeezed my hand, and there was something like pride in his voice. That's brave, right? Like you said. I squeezed back, my heart swelling with affection for this fierce, wounded little soul.
Yeah, sweetheart.
That's brave. Chapter 4. The first crack in the wall. The first week passed in a blur of small victories and setbacks that left me exhausted in ways I'd never experienced. Caspian's trauma ran deeper than I'd imagined, roots twisted through every part of him like poison vines. He woke screaming most nights, thrashing in his closet nest while I held him and whispered reassurances that felt hollow even as I spoke to them. He refused to eat unless I ate first, as if afraid the food might be poisoned or that all of this, was some elaborate trick. And he had panic attacks whenever anyone knocked on our door, his small body going rigid with terror until I could talk him down from the edge. But there were moments of light too. Small, precious things that made my heart squeeze with hope. The first time he laughed at a story I told, a ridiculous tale about a wolf who was afraid of his own shadow, his eyes had widened in surprise, as if he'd forgotten what laughter felt like. The morning he chose to sleep in his actual bed instead of the closet, climbing under the covers with such deliberate care that I knew it cost him something to be that vulnerable in open space. In the afternoon, he asked if we could go outside. That last request terrified me more than anything else. Outside, I repeated, trying to keep my voice neutral even as my pulse kicked up. We'd barely left the suite in 7 days, existing in our own private bubble where the rest of the world couldn't reach us. To the gardens. His voice was small, uncertain. I used to go there with Mom. He looked down at his hands, fingers twisting together. But I don't know if I remember how to get there anymore. My heart squeezed painfully. Of course he doesn't remember. He was barely old enough to form memories when she died. We can find it together, I said gently. Would you like that? He nodded, but I saw the fear in his eyes. The same fear I felt. The suite had become our sanctuary, and leaving it meant facing the rest of the world. All those watching eyes, all that judgment, all those opportunities for things to go wrong. But he was asking, reaching, and I couldn't let my own fear hold him back. We dressed carefully. Caspian in warm clothes that actually fit him now. I'd requested adjustments after noticing how everything had hung on his thin frame like curtains. I chose one of the simple dresses that had been provided, still unused to having options, still uncomfortable with anything that might draw attention. The corridors felt different in daylight, less oppressive but more exposed. Every staff member we passed stopped and bowed, their eyes curious and assessing. I felt their judgment like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. Who is this rejected Omega walking through the royal quarters like she belongs? What makes her think she's special enough to care for the king's son? Caspian's hand tightened in mine with each person we encountered, and I found myself drawing him closer, a protective instinct I hadn't known I possessed rising up fierce and primal. The gardens, when we finally found them after taking 2 wrong turns, took my breath away. They sprawled across the southern grounds, a masterpiece of design even in the grip of winter. Snow covered most of the paths, but someone had cleared walkways between dormant flower beds and bare trees that would probably be spectacular in spring. Frozen fountains caught the weak sunlight like captured stars. At the center stood a greenhouse, its glass panels reflecting the pale winter sky. There, Caspian whispered, pointing with a trembling finger. That's where we used to go. We walked slowly, and I noticed how his breathing had changed, quicker, shallower. Memories were surfacing, bringing pain with them like daggers wrapped in silk. Inside, the greenhouse was warm and humid, filled with plants that defied the season outside. Orchids bloomed in impossible colors, deep purple, brilliant orange, soft pink that seemed to glow from within. Vines climbed toward the glass ceiling, reaching for light. The air smelled of earth and growth, and something sweet I couldn't identify. Caspian stopped in front of a particular section where white roses grew wild, climbing up trellises and spilling over edges in cascades of pale petals. His small face crumpled, years of held-back grief suddenly visible in every line. These were her favorites. His voice cracked like breaking ice. She said they meant new beginnings. That even when things were hard, something beautiful could grow. Tears began streaming down his cheeks. She called them moonflower roses because they glowed in the dark like pieces of the moon fell to earth. I knelt beside him, not touching, just present. She sounds like she was very wise. I can't remember her voice anymore. The words came out choked, strangled. I try and try, but it's gone. And sometimes I can't remember her face unless I look at pictures, and that makes me so angry, Vesper. I want to break things. I want to hurt something until it stops hurting inside. Oh, Caspian. Everyone says I should be over it. His hands had curled into fists, knuckles white. It's been 3 years, and I need to move on and be strong. But I don't know how. I don't know how to be anything except scared and angry all the time. I reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement so he could pull away if he needed to, and pulled him into my arms. He collapsed against me, not crying in the way children usually cry, loud and messy, and eventually soothing. This was different. He shook with the force of emotions too big for his small body, dry sobs that seemed to be tearing him apart from the inside. You don't have to be over it, I said firmly, fiercely. And anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong. She was your mother. You're allowed to miss her forever. Do you understand me? Forever. He pulled back slightly, looking at me with those ancient eyes swimming in tears. Really? Really? And being scared and angry? That's okay too. Those feelings are trying to protect you.
They're not bad, Caspian.
They're just really, really loud right now. We sat like that among the moonflower roses for a long time, and I thought about my own losses, my own mother who died when I was 12, my own anger that I'd learned to bury so deep it had nearly suffocated me. Maybe healing wasn't about getting over things. Maybe it was about learning to carry them differently, to make room for the weight without letting it crush you completely. Vesper. His voice was muffled against my shoulder. Yeah. Do you think my dad misses her too? The question surprised me with its insight, its careful hope. I think he probably does. Very much. Then why doesn't he ever talk about her? Why does everyone act like she never existed? I had no answer for that, at least not one that wouldn't overstep my place. But I filed the question away, sensing it was important, a key to understanding both father and son, the chasm of grief that kept them separated. We stayed in the greenhouse until Caspian's breathing had steadied and some of the tension had left his small shoulders. The white roses seemed to glow in the afternoon light, and I understood why the late queen had loved them. They were beautiful and resilient, blooming even in the cold darkness of winter. On the way back, we encountered fewer staff members, and I was grateful for it, until we rounded a corner and nearly collided with the Alpha King himself. He stopped abruptly, and I saw surprise flicker across his face before it smoothed into that careful neutrality he wore like armor. Caspian. Miss Winters. His eyes moved between us, taking in our disheveled appearance, Caspian's red-rimmed eyes, the way my hand gripped his protectively. Is everything all right? We went to the gardens, Caspian said quietly, and I heard the challenge in his voice, the expectation of being told he shouldn't have, that it was dangerous, that he'd done something wrong. But the king just nodded slowly. The greenhouse.
Yeah.
To see Mom's roses. Something passed over the Alpha King's face then, grief, maybe, or regret. There and gone so quickly I might have imagined it, like a ghost passing through a wall. They're beautiful this time of year, he said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. Then, after a pause that seemed to stretch into eternity, she would have liked knowing you still visited them. Caspian's eyes widened as if shocked to hear his father speak of his mother at all, to acknowledge she'd existed, that she'd loved and been loved. You remember which ones were her favorites, the king continued, something almost gentle in his tone now. The white ones, the moonflowers. Caspian's voice was barely audible. She filled our rooms with them when you were born. The king's hands clenched at his sides, and I saw the effort it took him to continue. Said you were her new beginning, her greatest joy. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. I'm sorry I don't speak of her more often, the king said, and his voice was raw now, stripped of authority. It's difficult for me too. It is, Caspian whispered, and there was such desperate hope in those two small words that my heart cracked clean through. They stared at each other, father and son, separated by 3 feet and an ocean of grief neither knew how to cross. I felt like an intruder in this moment, a witness to something private and painful and precious. But Caspian's hand was still in mine, anchoring him, giving him the courage to stay present instead of running back to his closet nest. The Alpha King's eyes shifted to me, and I saw something in them I hadn't expected. Gratitude, maybe. Or just bone-deep exhaustion and the faint, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this broken thing could be mended. Maya tells me Caspian has been sleeping better, he said, his voice carefully controlled again. Some nights are better than others, I said carefully, not wanting to oversell our progress or undersell the challenges that remained. But yes, overall there's been improvement. And eating? He's starting to. It takes time. The king nodded, but I saw the frustration underneath. A man used to problems having solutions, to commands being followed, to being able to fix things through sheer force of will. Struggling with something that couldn't be conquered, only endured and slowly, painfully healed. Your Majesty, I said before I could stop myself, the words tumbling out before wisdom could catch them. May I ask you something? His eyebrow raised slightly, and I saw the wariness flicker across his face. You may ask. I took a breath, steeling myself. When was the last time you spent time with Caspian? Not checking on him or giving orders about his care, but just being with him. The silence that followed was arctic, frost forming on every surface. I'd overstepped badly, and I knew it. Questioned the king's parenting, his dedication, his love for his son. All the things a lowly Omega had no right to question. I'm very busy, he said finally, his voice cold enough to freeze blood. Running a kingdom requires. I understand. I interrupted gently, knowing I was digging my grave deeper, but unable to stop. I think Caspian might need his father as much as he needs me. Maybe more. He can't stand my presence. You've seen it yourself. Each word was clipped, controlled fury barely leashed. Because he's scared. Not of you, of losing you too. It's easier to push you away than to risk caring and having you disappear like his mother did. The words landed like stones thrown into still water, and I watched the Alpha King's expression shift through several emotions before settling on something that might have been pain, carefully masked but undeniable. You presume to understand a great deal, Miss Winters. I only understand what it's like to lose people and be too afraid to let anyone close again. My voice was quiet but steady. Caspian and I have that in common. He studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself to hold his gaze, even though every instinct screamed to look away, to submit, to beg forgiveness for my audacity. Dinner, he said finally, the word dropping into the silence like a judge's gavel. Tonight. The three of us, in the private dining room. Caspian's hand tightened in mine almost painfully, and before he could protest, I squeezed back gently. We'd be honored, Your Majesty. After he walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, Caspian looked up at me with something like betrayal in his eyes. Why did you say yes? I don't want to have dinner with him. I know, I said gently, kneeling down to his level. But sometimes the things we need most are the things we're most scared of. That doesn't make sense. Not yet, I agreed, brushing a strand of dark hair from his forehead. But it will. Chapter 5. Breaking Bread. That evening, getting Caspian ready for dinner felt like preparing for battle. He fought me on everything, the clothes, the timing, even washing his face. But underneath the resistance, I sensed the real emotion churning like a storm beneath calm water.
Hope.
He hoped his father would see him, really see him, and he was terrified of being disappointed again. Terrified that this dinner would be just another reminder that he was too broken, too difficult, too much of a painful reminder of everything his father had lost. What if he doesn't want to talk to me? Caspian asked as I helped him into a clean shirt, his voice small and fragile. What if he just sits there and looks at me like I'm something he wishes wasn't there? I pulled him close, feeling his small frame tremble against me. Then we'll get through it together. But Caspian, I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think your father wants to connect with you. He just doesn't know how. Why not? He's the king. He knows how to do everything. The innocent logic of a child, that power meant understanding, that authority meant having all the answers. If only it were that simple. Being good at ruling a kingdom doesn't mean being good at talking about feelings, I said gently. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who have the hardest time being vulnerable. He looked up at me with those ancient eyes. Like you. The observation hit me like a physical blow. Yeah, I admitted softly. Like me. The private dining room was smaller than I'd expected, intimate even. A round table was set for three with fine china and crystal glasses that caught the candlelight like captured stars. The Alpha King was already there, and I noticed he'd changed from his formal attire into something simpler, more approachable, a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars that told stories I'd never heard. "Caspian," he said as we entered, and I heard the careful control in his voice, the effort it took to keep his tone gentle. "Thank you for joining me." Caspian said nothing, pressing against my side like I was a shield that could protect him from disappointment. The first part of dinner was awkward, stilted conversation and long silences broken only by the clink of silverware against china. I tried to fill the gaps with small observations about the food, the room, anything to ease the suffocating tension. But then the king set down his fork and looked at his son with an expression I hadn't seen before. Something softer, more vulnerable. "Did Vesper tell you about the time your mother rescued a cat from a tree during a state dinner?" Caspian's head snapped up, eyes wide. "What?" "She was supposed to be entertaining foreign dignitaries, very important people from the Northern Territories. But she heard a cat crying outside the window." The ghost of a smile touched the king's lips, and it transformed his entire face. She excused herself, climbed out a window in her formal gown, and came back 20 minutes later covered in leaves with the cat tucked inside her dress. "Really?" Caspian leaned forward slightly, drawn in despite himself. "Really?" The northern ambassadors were horrified. I was trying not to laugh. "But your mother just sat back down like nothing had happened, with this tiny orange kitten poking its head out of her neckline." The king's voice grew rougher, thick with emotion. "That was the night I knew I loved her. Not because she was graceful or proper or any of the things a queen is supposed to be, but because she was fearlessly, stubbornly kind." I watched Caspian's face transform, surprise giving way to wonder, wonder giving way to something like joy. "I don't remember that story." "There are hundreds of stories," the king said quietly, and his gray eyes held his son's gaze. "About her laugh that sounded like music, about the way she danced in rainstorms, about how she insisted on visiting every village in the kingdom because she wanted to know the people she served." He paused, and I saw his hands tremble slightly before he clenched them into fists. Maybe I could tell you more of them, if you'd like." The silence that followed was different from before. Not empty, but full, pregnant with possibility and hope and the first tentative steps across a chasm that had seemed uncrossable. "Yeah," Caspian said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'd like that." Something in the room shifted then. Subtle, but unmistakable. A crack in the wall between them, small but significant, like the first ray of light breaking through storm clouds. The king told another story, then another. About the queen's terrible singing voice that she insisted on using anyway. About the time she got lost in their own palace and ended up in the kitchens at midnight, helping the night staff bake bread. About the way she'd cried when Caspian was born, not sad tears, but overwhelmed, overflowing joy. And with each story, I watched Caspian come alive. His eyes brightened. His posture relaxed. He even ate without being prompted, too caught up in these glimpses of the mother, he barely remembered to worry about food being poisoned or this being a trick. "She used to sing to me," Caspian said suddenly, the memory surfacing like a fish breaking water. "Something about stars and moonlight and being brave." The king went very still. "The lullaby of the moon guard," he said softly. "It's an old song, passed down through the royal line. She sang it to me too, when—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "When what?" Caspian asked, leaning forward eagerly. "When I had nightmares. After battles, or when the weight of ruling felt too heavy." The king's voice was raw now, stripped of pretense. "Your mother understood that even kings get scared. Even alphas need comfort." I felt tears prick at my eyes, watching this moment unfold. The king allowed himself to be vulnerable, to be human, to show his son that strength and fear could exist in the same heart. "Do you still get scared?" Caspian asked, and there was no judgment in the question, only genuine curiosity. Every day. The king's answer was immediate, honest. I'm scared of failing the kingdom. Scared of making the wrong decisions. Scared of... His eyes found his son's. Scared of losing you. Of not being the father you need. Caspian stared at his father, and I saw understanding dawn in those ancient eyes. The realization that his father's distance wasn't rejection, it was terror. Fear wrapped in authority, vulnerability hidden behind walls built so high even the builder couldn't see over them. I'm scared too, Caspian whispered. All the time. I know. The king's voice broke slightly. And I should have been there to help you through it. To tell you that your mother's death wasn't your fault. That she loved you more than anything in this world. That she'd be so proud of the brave boy you're becoming. Something inside Caspian broke then, not shattered, but opened. Like a dam finally giving way to water that had been held back too long. He launched himself from his chair and ran to his father, small arms wrapping around the king's neck with desperate force. The king caught him, pulling him close, and I saw tears streaming down both their faces. Not the violent, thrashing sobs from before, but deep, cleansing grief, the kind that had been trapped too long, poisoning them from the inside. I miss her so much, Caspian choked out against his father's shoulder. And I missed you too. I missed you, Dad. I'm here now. The king's voice was thick, rough. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I promise, Caspian. I promise. I backed toward the door, giving them privacy, giving them this moment they so desperately needed. But the king's voice stopped me. Stay. Please. He looked at me over Caspian's head, and his eyes were red-rimmed but clear. You're part of this too. So I stayed, sitting in the chair by the window, and watched father and son finally begin to heal the wounds that had festered between them for 3 years. The king told more stories, not sanitized versions meant for public consumption, but real memories full of laughter and imperfection and love. The kind of stories that made the dead feel alive again, if only for a moment. Caspian asked questions he'd been too afraid to voice before, about his mother's last days, about whether she'd been in pain, about the moment he was born. And the king answered with an honesty that must have cost him dearly, his voice breaking multiple times but never stopping, never retreating behind walls. Hours passed. The candles burned low. The food grew cold and forgotten. But none of it mattered because something precious was being rebuilt here in this small room. Not fixed. Some things were too broken to be fully restored. But made new. Transformed into something different, but no less beautiful. Eventually, Caspian fell asleep in his father's arms, peaceful in a way I'd never seen. No tension in his small body, no fear etched in his features. Just a child who'd cried himself out and found safety in the embrace of someone who loved him. The king looked up at me, and I saw gratitude and something else in his eyes. Something that made my breath catch. My heart stuttered in my chest. Thank you, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper to avoid waking his son. For not giving up on us. For seeing what I was too blind to see. I just helped you find what was already there, I said, though my voice was unsteady.
No.
He stood carefully, cradling Caspian against his chest. You did more than that. You showed me that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about having the courage to feel everything and keep going anyway. He moved toward me, and suddenly the space between us felt charged with something I didn't dare name. Something dangerous and thrilling and utterly forbidden. Vesper, he said, and my name on his lips sent shivers down my spine. Yes, Your Majesty? These past days, watching you with Caspian, seeing your compassion and bravery. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. You've reminded me that there's still beauty in this world. Still reasons to feel, to hope, to believe in second chances. My throat tightened. Your Majesty, I'm just a rejected Omega. I'm nothing special. Don't. His free hand reached up, fingers gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was featherlight, but it burned like a brand. You're extraordinary. And whoever rejected you was a blind fool who didn't deserve you. The air between us was electric, crackling with tension. I should step back. This was dangerous, an Omega and an Alpha King, a chasm of power and station between us that couldn't be crossed. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare into those storm-gray eyes and wonder if this impossible thing I felt building in my chest was real or just wishful thinking. I should go, he said finally, his voice rough. Get him to bed. Yes, I agreed, but neither of us moved. Then, slowly, carefully, giving me every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to my forehead. Gentle, chaste, but full of promise and possibility and things too fragile to examine in harsh light. Sleep well, Vesper Winters. He left then, carrying his sleeping son, leaving me standing in the candlelit dining room with my heart racing and my world tilting on its axis. Everything had changed. The king had broken through to his son. And somewhere along the way, he'd started breaking through to me too. Chapter 6. Shadows in the Courtyard. The next morning, I woke to find Caspian already awake and watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not ancient or haunted, but something lighter. Almost peaceful. Good morning, I said softly, pushing myself up on my elbows. We'd both fallen asleep in his actual bed last night, not the closet nest, but the carved wooden bed with its soft mattress and down pillows. Morning. He smiled, actually smiled, and it transformed his entire face. I had a dream about Mom, but it wasn't scary this time. She was in the greenhouse with the moonflower roses, and she was happy. My heart squeezed. That sounds like a beautiful dream. Yeah. He sat up, pulling his knees to his chest. Vesper, do you think things can get better? Really better? I thought about that broken child I'd met barely a week ago and the boy in front of me now, still wounded, still healing, but no longer drowning. I thought about the king holding his son last night, both of them crying but together, finally together. Yeah, I said softly, pulling him into a hug. I really do. After breakfast, Caspian surprised me with another request. I want to meet the other children. I paused in the middle of clearing our plates, my hand frozen in midair. Other children? In the courtyards. I hear them playing sometimes. His voice was hesitant, uncertain, but there was something underneath it. Curiosity. Maybe even hope. The staff's children. I've been watching them from the window. My stomach clenched with worry. The outside world had been cruel before, and Caspian was still so fragile. But I also saw the courage it took for him to ask, to reach beyond the safety of our bubble. I should have been more cautious. Should have consulted the king first, gotten permission, prepared better. But Caspian's eyes were so hopeful, and I'd been so proud of his progress that I simply said yes. It was a decision I'd regret. The courtyard was bustling with activity when we arrived, children of various ages playing in the snow, their laughter echoing off stone walls. Guards watched from the perimeter and a few staff members supervised, making sure no one got hurt or wandered too far. Caspian's hand tightened in mine as we stood at the edge, and I felt his entire body tense like a bowstring pulled taut. You can just watch if you want, I told him gently. No pressure. We can leave any time you feel uncomfortable. He nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the children building snow forts and throwing snowballs, living lives that seemed impossibly carefree compared to his own. We stood there for several minutes, and I noticed how the other children had started to take notice of us. Whispers spread like ripples in water. Fingers pointed. Eyes widened. The Alpha King's son. The strange Omega nobody. A boy about Caspian's age approached, bold in the way only children who've never known real fear can be. He had sandy hair and freckles scattered across his nose like constellations. "Want to play?" he asked, holding out a toy soldier carved from wood. Caspian looked up at me, uncertainty written across his small face. His fingers dug into my palm. "Do you want to?" I asked softly. He nodded, barely perceptible, but it was there. "Then go ahead. I'll be right here." I watched him take those first tentative steps toward the other children, and saw the way he hesitated before accepting the toy soldier the boy offered. Within minutes, he was kneeling in the snow with 3 other children, building something that might have been a fort or a castle. Pride swelled in my chest like a living thing. This was what healing looked like, small moments of bravery, choosing connection over safety. I was so focused on Caspian that I didn't notice the woman approaching until she spoke. You must be the miracle worker everyone's talking about. I turned to find a woman in her 30s, elegantly dressed despite the cold. Dark hair was swept up in an intricate style that probably took an hour to arrange. Her smile was pleasant, but her eyes were calculating, assessing me like a merchant evaluating goods at market. I'm just helping where I can, I said carefully. Modest too. How refreshing. She extended a perfectly manicured hand. I'm Calypso. My husband serves on the King's Council. That's my son Declan playing with the young prince. She gestured toward the sandy-haired boy. I shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip. Deliberate, a subtle show of dominance. Vesper. Oh, I know who you are. Everyone does. Her smile never wavered, though I heard the edge underneath. The rejected Omega who somehow tamed the untamable child. Quite the fairy tale. Tell me, how does it feel to go from nothing to living in the royal quarters? He crept up my neck, shame and anger mixing into something bitter. I'm just here for Caspian. Of course you are. Her tone was light, conversational, but I felt the judgment dripping from every word. I imagine it must be quite the change from that sanctuary. I hear those places are rather grim. Before I could respond, raised voices cut through the courtyard's pleasant atmosphere. I turned to see Caspian backing away from a larger boy, not Declan, but someone older, maybe 6 or 7, with cruel eyes and a smirk that made my blood run cold. Freak, the boy was saying, loud enough for everyone to hear. Every child, every staff member, every guard. My dad says your mom died because she was ashamed of you. Says you're cursed. The courtyard went silent. Even the wind seemed to still. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. I watched Caspian's eyes go wide, then dark with rage and hurt and something primal. His small body tensed, hands curling into fists. He was going to explode. Going to hurt someone or himself or both. I was moving before conscious thought kicked in, crossing the courtyard in seconds. But Calypso was faster, grabbing the larger boy, her son, I realized with sick horror, by the arm. Declan, apologize immediately. But the damage was done. Caspian was shaking, tears streaming down his face. All the progress we'd made crumbling like sand castles before the tide. The other children had backed away, frightened by the intensity of his reaction. Caspian, I said softly, kneeling in front of him. Look at me. Just me. His eyes found mine, wild, hurt, drowning. Breathe with me, I demonstrated, taking a slow breath in.
In.
After a moment, he mimicked me, his chest hitching. And out. That's it. You're okay. He said Mom was ashamed of me. His voice cracked, and I felt my own heart breaking. He said I'm cursed. He's wrong. He's completely wrong, and he's going to apologize. I don't want his apology. Caspian's face crumpled. I want my mom. I want her back, and I can't have her, and nothing will ever be okay again. I pulled him into my arms, holding him while he sobbed. Aware of every eye on us, every whisper spreads through the courtyard like poison. Calypso was reprimanding her son, but the words felt hollow, performative. The other children were being ushered away by their caregivers, and I felt the weight of failure pressing down on me like stones piled on my chest. I'd pushed too hard, too fast. In my eagerness to help Caspian grow, I'd exposed him to cruelty he wasn't ready to face. Come on, I whispered against his hair. Let's go home. He clung to me as I carried him back through the palace corridors, his small body racked with sobs that seemed too big for someone so small. Staff members we passed stopped and stared, their expressions ranging from pity to judgment to carefully concealed satisfaction. The rejected Omega failed after all. Just like we knew she would. By the time we reached our suite, Caspian was exhausted, his tears spent. I settled him on the couch, wrapping him in a soft blanket and making tea with honey, something my own mother used to do when the world felt too heavy. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, staring into his cup. "I ruined everything." "You didn't ruin anything. That boy was cruel, and you reacted like anyone would. But I was supposed to be better, to be normal." He looked at me with those ancient eyes, and I saw the weight of impossible expectations crushing him. "That's what this is all about, right? Making me normal so Dad doesn't have to be ashamed of me too." The words hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath. "Caspian, no. Your father isn't ashamed of you. Then why doesn't he want to be around me? Why does he need you to fix me before he can love me?" I had no answer. No way to explain the complexity of grief and fear and protective distance that the king had built around himself. Caspian was right in the way children often are, cutting straight to the painful truth adults tried to avoid with elaborate justifications. A knock at the door made us both tense. Before I could respond, it opened to reveal the king himself, his expression thunderous. I heard what happened. His voice was controlled, but I heard the fury underneath, a volcano barely contained. Why was my son in the public courtyard without security, without prior approval? I stood, positioning myself slightly in front of Caspian. He wanted to play with other children. I thought. You thought wrong. He moved into the room, and I felt the full weight of his dominance pressing down like a physical force. You're here to care for him, not make decisions about his security and exposure. With respect, Your Majesty, he can't heal if he's locked away from everything. He can't heal if he's traumatized by cruel children either. His eyes were hard, cold, the warmth from last night completely gone. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're too soft, too inexperienced. You don't understand the dangers. Something in me snapped, a thread pulled too tight finally breaking. "No," I said, my voice rising despite every instinct screaming to submit. "What I don't understand is how you think protecting him from everything will help him learn to face anything. Yes, today was hard. Yes, he got hurt. But he also played with other children for the first time in years. He laughed. He tried. And now he's crying on the couch because someone told him his mother was ashamed of him." The king's control was slipping, his voice rising to match mine. "How is that progress?" "Because he's feeling it instead of burying it." I stepped forward, matching his intensity, even though I was shaking. "Because he's learning that pain doesn't have to destroy him. You want to keep him safe by keeping him isolated, but all you're doing is teaching him that the world is too dangerous to face, that he's too broken to be part of it. You know nothing about keeping someone safe. And you know nothing about healing." The words burst out before I could stop them. "You lost your mate, and instead of grieving with your son, you locked yourself away and hired strangers to feel for you, to hurt you. Well, I'm sorry, but Caspian needs more than a father who's too afraid of his own pain to acknowledge his son's." The silence that followed was absolute. I'd gone too far, said things that couldn't be unsaid, crossed lines that should never be crossed. The Alpha King's face had gone pale, then red, emotions warring across his features, rage, grief, something that might have been recognition. "Get out." His voice was quiet, deadly. "Pack your things and be gone within the hour." "No." Caspian's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He'd thrown off his blanket and was standing now, small fists clenched at his sides. "She doesn't leave. If she leaves, I'll..." He struggled for words, for threats that might carry weight. "I'll be worse than before. I'll break everything. I'll never talk to you again." The king looked at his son, and I saw the devastation on his face. The recognition that even threats of self-destruction weren't enough to bridge the gap between them, that he'd somehow become the villain in his own child's story. "Caspian, I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection." Caspian's voice broke, tears streaming down his face again. "I need someone who understands. Vesper understands. She knows what it's like to be broken and scared. You just want me to be fixed so you don't have to look at me and remember Mom." The truth hung in the air between them, ugly and undeniable. The Alpha King's eyes found mine, and for just a moment, I saw past the armor to the man underneath, lost, grieving, terrified of failing the one person who mattered most. 2 weeks, he said finally, his voice rough as gravel. You have 2 more weeks. But no more unsupervised outings. No more decisions without consulting me first. Is that understood? Yes, Your Majesty. He turned to leave, paused at the door without looking back. And, Miss Winters? Don't presume to know what I feel or don't feel. You may understand my son's pain, but you know nothing of mine. After he left, the door closing with controlled force, Caspian collapsed back onto the couch, emotionally spent. Did I make it worse? He asked quietly.
No, sweetheart.
You told the truth. Sometimes that makes things worse before they get better. Will you have to leave?
Not yet.
We still have time. But what if time isn't enough? I held him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling the weight of all my failures and all my hopes pressing down like stones. Then we'll figure something else out. Together. But even as I said the words, I wondered if I believed them. 2 weeks left. 2 weeks to prove I wasn't just a rejected Omega playing at something she didn't understand. 2 weeks to heal wounds that had festered for years. 2 weeks to do the impossible. Again. Chapter 7. The Weight of Truth. The days following the courtyard incident were heavy with tension, thick as storm clouds before lightning strikes. Caspian had retreated into himself again. Not completely. He still slept in his bed, still ate with me, still let me hold him when nightmares came. But something had dimmed in his eyes, that fragile hope we'd been nurturing now covered in frost. The king had become a ghost. I knew he was there. Staff members mentioned him. Guards snapped to attention when he passed. Documents appeared on desks requiring signatures. But he didn't come to our suite. Didn't ask about Caspian's progress. Didn't acknowledge the dinner we'd shared or the moment of connection that had bloomed between father and son like those moonflower roses in winter. His silence was more damning than any words could have been. I was failing. We both knew it. On the 5th day after the confrontation, Maya knocked with a message that made my stomach drop. The king requests your presence in his study. Alone. I looked at Caspian, who'd been building a tower with wooden blocks, one of the few toys he'd actually touched. His small hands stilled, fear flickering across his face. It's okay, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I'll be back soon. Promise. Promise. But as I walked through those endless corridors toward the king's study, I wondered if it was a promise I could keep. The study felt different in the afternoon light, less imposing, perhaps, or maybe I was just too exhausted to be properly intimidated anymore. The king stood at his usual position by the window, looking out over the city he ruled with an iron fist while his own heart remained untouched. Your Majesty, I said softly. You asked to see me. He didn't turn immediately, and when he did, I was struck by how tired he looked. Lines etched deeper around his eyes, shadows beneath them that spoke of sleepless nights. His jaw was tight, but there was something else in his expression, something raw and unguarded. Caspian had another nightmare last night, he said without preamble. Maya heard him screaming from 2 corridors away. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, Your Majesty. That makes 3 in the past 5 nights. He moved away from the window, coming to stand behind his desk, a barrier between us, physical and symbolic. 3 weeks, Miss Winters. That was our agreement. Tomorrow marks 3 weeks, and my son is no better than when you arrived. That's not true, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. He's sleeping in his bed now instead of hiding in the closet. He's eating regularly. He's trying to engage with the world instead of... He's what? The king's voice was flat, emotionless in a way that was somehow worse than anger. Playing with other children? That ended in disaster. Sleeping better? He woke up screaming about his mother dying and me not caring. Eating properly? Only when you're there to coax him, like you would a wounded animal. Each word landed like a blow, and I felt something inside me crack. You're right, I said quietly. I failed. But not because I'm too soft or inexperienced. Then why? Because I can't fix what's broken between you and your son. Only you can do that. And you won't. His eyes narrowed dangerously. I've given him everything. Everything except yourself. The words burst out of me. 3 weeks of frustration and heartbreak, and watching these two people I'd come to care about circling each other like wounded animals. You give him money, security, staff, specialists, everything but the one thing he actually needs.
You.
His father. The person who loved his mother as much as he did and understands what he lost. Every time I look at him, I see her. The king's voice was rough, raw in a way I'd never heard. Every feature, every expression, every goddamn smile. Do you have any idea what that's like? To love someone so much that even their absence destroys you. No, I said, and I felt tears burning behind my eyes. But I know what it's like to be abandoned by someone who was supposed to protect me. To believe that my pain was too much, too inconvenient, too difficult to deal with. And that's exactly what you're doing to Caspian. He moved toward me then, coming around the desk, and I saw fury flash in those storm-gray eyes. You presume too much, Miss Winters. Maybe. I held my ground even as my knees shook. But someone has to tell you the truth. Your son thinks you don't love him. He thinks his mother's death was his fault, and that you can't stand to be near him because he reminds you of what you lost. And every day you avoid him, every moment you choose distance over discomfort, you prove him right. Get out.
No.
The word hung in the air between us, sharp and defiant. The king stared at me like I'd grown a second head, shock flickering across his features before hardening into something darker. What did you just say? Not until you hear this. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Tomorrow you can fire me. You can bring in every specialist in the kingdom, hire 100 caregivers, build him a palace made of gold. But unless you face your own grief and learn to be present with your son's pain, nothing will change. He doesn't need me, Your Majesty. He needs you. The silence that stretched between us was suffocating. I could see the war raging behind his eyes, fury and pain and fear all battling for dominance. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, and I wondered if I'd finally pushed him too far, if he'd call the guards and have me dragged from the palace. But then, unexpectedly, his shoulders sagged. The king, the most powerful alpha in the kingdom, seemed to deflate before my eyes, authority draining away to reveal the man beneath. I don't know how, he said, and his voice was broken in a way that made my heart ache. Every time I try to reach for him, I freeze. Every time I think about talking to him about her, the words die in my throat. What if I make it worse? What if I say the wrong thing? What if he sees me break and loses the only parent he has left? I felt my anger dissolve into something softer, something that understood the weight of impossible choices. He's already lost you, I said gently. You're alive, but you're absent. And that's worse than any grief, because at least grief is honest. At least grief acknowledges what was lost. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the man beneath the crown. Terrified. Drowning. Desperately trying to hold everything together while falling apart inside. Tell me what to do, he said quietly.
Please. I'll do anything.
Start with the truth. Tell him you miss his mother too. That you're scared. That you don't know how to get what he needs, but you want to try. I took a breath, steadying myself. And stop punishing yourself for still being alive when she's not. Something shifted in his expression, recognition, maybe, or the first crack in a dam that had held too long. He reached up, running a hand through his dark hair, and I saw it trembling slightly. She made everything better, he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear. Every impossible decision, every burden, every moment I thought I'd break under the weight of this crown, she made it bearable. And when she died, he stopped, jaw clenching. I couldn't let myself fall apart because Caspian needed someone to be strong. So I buried it. All of it. And now it's been so long, I don't know how to feel anything without it destroying me. Then let it destroy you, I said softly. Let yourself break. Let Caspian see that you're human, that you hurt, that loving someone and losing them leaves scars. He needs to know he's not alone in his pain. Will you help me? The question was raw, vulnerable. Not as his caregiver.
As,
I don't know. A guide. Someone who understands. I'll help however I can, I said. But this conversation has to be between you and Caspian. I can't fix your relationship. Only you can build it. He nodded slowly, then looked at me with something new in his eyes. Not just gratitude or respect, but something deeper, something that made my breath catch and my heart stutter. You're extraordinary, Vesper Winters, he said quietly. Your former alpha was a fool. Heat crept up my neck. I'm just. Don't. He stepped closer, and suddenly the space between us felt charged with electricity. Don't diminish yourself. Don't pretend you're less than you are. You've done in 3 weeks what 17 specialists couldn't do in months. You've shown me things about myself I was too afraid to see. You've given my son hope when I'd given him only distance. My heart was hammering so hard I thought he must hear it. Your Majesty. Kieran, he said softly. When we're alone, call me Kieran. The intimacy of it stole my breath. An Alpha King asking a rejected Omega to use his given name. It was unheard of, inappropriate, dangerous in ways I couldn't even begin to process. I can't, I whispered. Why not? Because I struggled for words, for all the reasons this was impossible. Because I'm nobody. Because there's a world of difference between us. Because you're afraid? His hand reached up, fingers gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, the touch sending shivers down my spine. I understand fear, Vesper. I've let it rule me for 3 years. But maybe it's time we both stopped letting it make our decisions. I wanted to step back, to create distance, to remind both of us of all the impossible barriers between us. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare into those storm-gray eyes and wonder if this impossible thing I felt building in my chest was real. I should go. I managed. Caspian will be worried. Yes. But he didn't move, didn't step back, didn't break the moment. Will you bring him to my private chambers tonight? After dinner? I need to talk to him. Really talk to him. Of course. And Vesper? His voice was soft, intimate. Thank you. For not giving up on us. For seeing past the walls I built and refusing to let me hide behind them. I left the study with my heart racing and my world tilting on its axis. Everything was changing. The king was changing, opening up in ways I'd thought impossible. But along with the hope came fear, sharp and undeniable. Because somewhere in the process of healing this broken family, I'd started to care too much. To hope for things that could never be. To imagine a future that didn't exist for someone like me. A rejected Omega didn't fall for the Alpha King. That wasn't how stories like mine ended. Chapter 8. Pieces of a Broken Heart. When I returned to our suite, Caspian was exactly where I'd left him, sitting cross-legged on the floor, wooden blocks scattered around him in patterns that didn't quite form anything. He looked up as I entered, and I saw the question in his eyes before he spoke it. Are you leaving? The fear in those 3 words broke something in me. I crossed the room quickly and knelt beside him, pulling him into my arms. No, sweetheart. I'm not leaving. But you were gone so long. And Dad was angry before. I thought. His voice cracked. I thought he told you to go away because of me. Never because of you. I held him tighter, breathing in the scent of his hair, soap and something sweet, innocent. Your father isn't angry at you, Caspian. He's angry at himself. Why? How did I explain the complexity of adult grief to a 3-year-old? How did I make him understand that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who hurt us deepest, not from cruelty, but from their own unbearable pain? Because he loves you so much that it scares him, I said finally. And sometimes when people are scared, they run away instead of facing what frightens them. Caspian pulled back slightly, looking at me with those ancient eyes. Like me? When will I hide in the closet? The parallel struck me like lightning.
yes.
Exactly like that. But you told me brave people feel scared and do things anyway. I did. So Dad needs to be brave too? From the mouths of children, Simple truths that adults spent years trying to avoid. Yeah, I said softly.
He does.
And I think he's ready to try. Dinner was a quiet affair, just the two of us in our suite. Caspian picked at his food, clearly nervous about what the evening would bring. I tried to keep the conversation light, telling him stories about the sanctuary, carefully edited versions that left out the loneliness, the rejection, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep. Were there other kids there? He asked, pushing a piece of roasted potato around his plate. A few, but mostly adults. People who'd been set aside by their packs. Like you. Like me. He was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. Then, I'm glad Dad picked you. Not just for me, but because you shouldn't have been set aside. Your old alpha was stupid. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made me smile despite the ache in my chest. Thank you, sweetheart. When I grow up, I'm going to make a rule. No more setting people aside just because they're different or soft or whatever. Everyone gets to stay. If only the world worked that way. If only a child's innocent sense of justice could reshape reality. That would be a good rule, I said gently. After dinner, as we prepared for the evening ahead, I noticed Caspian's hands were shaking slightly as I helped him into clean clothes. Nothing formal, just comfortable things, but he treated them with the gravity of armor before battle. What if it goes wrong? He asked as I combed his dark hair, so like his father's. What if he still can't talk about Mom? What if I make him sad? I knelt down, taking his small hands in mine. Caspian, listen to me. Your father is already sad. He's been sad for 3 years, carrying all that grief alone. You won't make it worse by talking about it. You'll make it better. You'll show him he doesn't have to carry it alone anymore. Promise. I promise. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down. What if I was wrong? What if opening these wounds only caused more pain? What if the king looked at his son and saw only loss, only absence, only the ghost of the woman he'd loved? Stop, I told myself firmly. You can't protect them from pain. You can only help them through it. The king's private chambers were in a different wing of the palace, smaller, more intimate than the formal spaces. When the doors opened, I was struck by how normal it felt. Yes, the furniture was expensive and the space was large, but there were personal touches here. Books stacked on tables, papers scattered across a desk, a fire burning in the hearth that cast warm light across everything. Kieran, I tried the name in my mind, testing it, stood when we entered. He'd changed from his formal attire into simple clothes similar to what Caspian wore. The gesture wasn't lost on me. A king making himself equal to his son, removing the barriers of authority and station. Caspian, he said, and his voice was gentle, careful. Thank you for coming. Caspian pressed against my side, but he didn't hide behind me. Progress. Miss Winters, Kieran continued, his gray eyes finding mine. Would you mind waiting in the adjacent room? I think this is something Caspian and I need to do alone. Fear flickered across Caspian's face, and his hand found mine, squeezing tight. I'll be right next door, I assured him softly. If you need me, just call. I'll hear you. Promise you won't leave? I promise. The adjacent room was a small library, lined with books from floor to ceiling. I settled into a chair near the door, close enough to hear if Caspian called, far enough to give them privacy. Through the partially open door, I could hear their voices, though not clearly enough to make out words. At first, there was only silence. Long, uncomfortable stretches of it. Then Kieran's voice, low and careful. Caspian's response, hesitant. More silence. I pressed my hands together to keep them from shaking, fighting the urge to go back in there, to facilitate, to fix. But this wasn't mine to fix. This was between father and son, a chasm that only they could bridge. The conversation continued, voices rising and falling like waves. At one point, I heard Caspian crying, not the violent, thrashing sobs from before, but something deeper, rawer. And underneath it, Kieran's voice, rough with emotion. I don't know how long I sat there. Time seemed to lose meaning, measured only by the crackling of the fire in the library hearth and the murmur of voices from the next room. Eventually, the door opened fully, and Kieran appeared. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face blotchy, evidence of tears that had finally been shed. But there was something different in his expression too. Something lighter, as if a crushing weight had been lifted. "He wants you," Kieran said softly. "He's asking for you." I found Caspian curled up in a large armchair by the fire, wrapped in a blanket. His face was tear-stained, his eyes exhausted, but when he saw me, he reached out with both arms. "Vesper." I gathered him close, settling into the chair with him in my lap. Over his head, I met Kieran's eyes and saw gratitude and something else, something that made my heart race and my breath catch. "We talked about Mom," Caspian said against my shoulder, his voice muffled and thick. "Dad told me about how they met. How she used to sing off-key and burn breakfast and trip over her own feet during formal dances." "She sounds wonderful," I said softly. "She was." Kieran's voice came from behind us, and I felt him settle into the chair beside ours. "She was imperfect and clumsy and absolutely terrible at royal protocol. And I loved her more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Caspian lifted his head, looking at his father. "You said she used to tell you it was okay to be scared, that even alphas need comfort." "She did." Kieran's voice was rough. "She'd hold me after battles, after difficult decisions, after days when the weight of the crown felt too heavy. She never made me feel weak for needing her." "I need you too," Caspian whispered. "But I was scared you didn't want me to need you." Something passed over Kieran's face, grief and regret and love all tangled together. He stood, moving to kneel in front of our chair, so he was at eye level with his son. "Caspian, I will never not want you to need me. You are my son. You are the most important thing in my world. And I'm sorry I made you feel otherwise. I'm sorry I let my own pain keep me from being the father you deserved. It's okay to miss her," Caspian said, reaching out to touch his father's face with one small hand. "Vesper says we can miss her forever if we want to. Vesper is very wise." Kieran's eyes found mine, and I saw everything in them, gratitude and respect and something deeper, something that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. "Can we tell more stories about her?" Caspian asked. "Not just the happy ones, but all of them? Even the sad parts?" "Yes." Kieran's voice broke slightly. "We can tell all the stories. As many as you want, whenever you want." "And Caspian?" He waited until his son was looking at him directly. "Thank you for being brave enough to talk to me. For not giving up on us, even when I'd given up on myself." Caspian yawned hugely, exhaustion finally catching up with the emotional toll of the evening. "I'm tired." "I know, little one." Kieran stood, reaching down. "May I carry you to bed?" For a moment, fear flickered in Caspian's eyes. Old instincts, old wounds. But then he nodded, allowing his father to lift him from my lap. The trust in that gesture made my throat tight with emotion. I followed them back to our suite, watching as Kieran carefully settled Caspian into his bed, the real bed, not the closet nest. He pulled the covers up, tucking them around his son with movements that were tentative, but growing more confident. "Will you stay?" Caspian asked, his eyes already half closed. "Both of you?" Kieran looked at me, questioning in his eyes. I nodded, settling into the chair by the bed, while Kieran sat on the edge of the mattress. "Tell me a story," Caspian murmured. "About Mom?" "Which one?" "The one about being brave even when you're scared." Kieran's hand found his son's, holding it gently. "Once upon a time," he began, his voice soft and steady, "there was a queen who was afraid of thunderstorms. Terrified, actually. But she never let anyone see her fear because she thought queens were supposed to be brave all the time. I watched them in the firelight, father and son, finally together, finally beginning to heal. And I felt something shift in my chest, something dangerous and beautiful and utterly impossible. Somewhere along the way, while helping this broken family find each other again, I'd lost my heart completely. To a child who taught me that survival wasn't the same as living. and to a king who'd shown me that walls built from pain could still be torn down with truth. One night during a terrible storm, Kieran continued, she was alone in her chambers, terrified, when she heard a knock at her door. It was me. I'd heard the thunder and knew she'd be scared. She opened the door, saw me standing there, and said, "You came." Like it was the most surprising thing in the world. "What did you say?" Caspian asked sleepily. I said, "Of course I came. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means letting someone hold you while you are." Caspian's breathing evened out, sleep finally claiming him. But Kieran kept talking, kept telling stories, not for his son anymore, but for himself. For the memories he'd locked away for 3 years. For the grief that needed acknowledgement before it could heal. I sat in that chair and listened, and wondered how I would survive leaving this place when my time was up. Because the 3 weeks are over tomorrow. And I'd fallen in love with both of them. Chapter 9. The morning after. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the disorienting realization that I'd fallen asleep in the chair beside Caspian's bed. My neck was stiff, my back aching from the awkward position, but none of that mattered when I saw what was in front of me. Kieran was still there, stretched out on top of the covers beside his sleeping son. One arm was draped protectively over Caspian, and his face, even in sleep, looked more peaceful than I'd ever seen it. The harsh lines had softened, the perpetual tension in his jaw finally released. They looked like what they were, father and son, family. I stood carefully, trying not to wake them, but Kieran's eyes opened immediately, alpha instincts, always alert even in rest. For a moment, he looked confused, disoriented. Then his gaze found mine, and something warm flickered in those storm-gray depths. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning." I suddenly felt self-conscious, aware of how I must look, rumpled dress, hair falling from its braid, the vulnerability of having fallen asleep while watching over them. I didn't mean to stay all night. I should. Don't. He sat up carefully, making sure not to disturb Caspian. "Don't apologize. You gave us something precious last night. The chance to begin again." The words settled over me like a warm blanket, but underneath them was the cold reality I couldn't ignore. "Your Majesty." "Kieran," he corrected gently. "Remember?" "Kieran," I said, testing his name on my tongue, feeling how intimate it was. "Today marks 3 weeks. Our agreement." "I know." He stood, moving around the bed toward me, and suddenly the space between us felt charged with possibility and impossibility in equal measure. "I know what I said. That you'd have 3 weeks to show progress, or I'd bring in my own people." My heart sank. Here it was, the end I'd been dreading. But I was wrong. His hand reached up, fingers brushing my cheeks so gently it might have been imagined. "You've done what I couldn't. You've given me back my son. You've shown me how to feel again, how to be present instead of just existing. How could I possibly let you go?" Hope flared in my chest, dangerous and bright. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying stay. Not for 3 more weeks or 3 more months. Just stay. As long as Caspian needs you. As long as," he stopped, jaw clenching as if the next words cost him something. "As long as you want to." "I want to," I whispered, the truth of it overwhelming. "But Your Majesty, Kieran, I'm just a rejected Omega. Eventually, people will question why you're keeping me here. They'll say things, make assumptions. Let them." His voice was firm, carrying the weight of command that came so naturally to him. "I don't care what they say. Caspian is thriving with you here. He's sleeping, eating, learning to process his grief instead of being consumed by it. And he paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "I'm learning too. Learning that grief doesn't have to mean isolation. That feeling deeply isn't a weakness." A sound from the bed made us both turn. Caspian was stirring, his eyes blinking open slowly. When he saw both of us there, a smile broke across his face, genuine, unguarded, beautiful. "You stayed," he said, wondering in his voice. "Both of you." "We stayed," Kieran confirmed, moving back to sit on the edge of the bed. "And Vesper is going to keep staying." If that's what you want. Caspian's eyes went wide. Really? Forever? The word hung in the air, full of implications neither Kieran nor I was ready to examine. For as long as you need me, I said carefully. I'll always need you. Caspian's certainty was absolute, the kind only children possess before life teaches them that nothing lasts forever. The next few days passed in a haze of cautious optimism. Kieran started joining us for breakfast each morning, not checking on Caspian, but actually being present, asking questions, telling stories, learning how to be a father instead of just a provider. Caspian bloomed under the attention like those moonflower roses in the greenhouse. His nightmares decreased. His appetite improved. Most importantly, the constant fear in his eyes began to fade, replaced by something that looked almost like security. But with the progress came new complications, ones I should have anticipated but somehow hadn't. The palace staff noticed the change. How could they not? The Alpha King takes breakfast in the family quarters instead of his formal dining room. The sound of laughter, actual laughter, echoing from the young prince's suite. And me, the rejected Omega, at the center of it all. Whispers followed me through the corridors. Eyes tracked my every movement. Not all of it was hostile. Some staff members smiled genuinely, seeming pleased that the prince was finally healing. But others looked at me with calculation, with suspicion, with the kind of cold assessment that made my skin crawl. Who does she think she is? A rejected Omega playing house with the Alpha King.
It won't last.
It never does. I tried to ignore them, to focus on Caspian and the miracle of watching him transform from a wounded, violent child into someone who could laugh and play and hope. But the whispers burrowed under my skin like splinters, reminding me of everything I'd tried to forget. I was still the Omega who'd been deemed inadequate, still the one who'd been cast aside as worthless. And no matter how much Kieran and Caspian needed me now, eventually they'd see what my former Alpha had seen, that I was too soft, too weak, too broken to be of real value. On the 6th day after our 3-week deadline, Maya appeared at the suite with an expression I couldn't quite read. Miss Winters, His Majesty requests that you join him for dinner tonight. In the formal dining hall. My stomach dropped. The formal hall? But we usually eat in the private. His Majesty was quite specific. Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. He's entertaining members of the High Council. He wants you there. After she left, I stood frozen, panic rising like floodwater. The formal dining hall meant courtiers and nobles, and all the people who'd been whispering about me. It meant being on display, being judged, being examined like a curiosity or an oddity or worse. Why does Dad want you at the fancy dinner? Caspian asked, looking up from the puzzle we'd been working on. I don't know, sweetheart. But I had a terrible suspicion. Kieran was making a statement, showing the High Council and the court that I wasn't just a temporary caregiver, but someone who belonged in his inner circle. It was a gesture of trust, of respect. It was also incredibly dangerous. Can I come too? Caspian asked hopefully. It's a grown-up dinner, love. But I'll tell you all about it when I get back. Promise you'll come back? The question shouldn't have hurt, but it did. A reminder of how tenuous his sense of security still was, how easily he could slip back into fear. I promise. That evening, I dressed with trembling hands in one of the finer gowns that had been provided, deep emerald green that brought out the color of my eyes. My hair, usually in a simple braid, had been styled by a patient staff member into something elegant and formal. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked like someone who belonged in a palace. Someone important. The illusion was perfect. If only I could make myself believe it. The formal dining hall was exactly as intimidating as I'd feared, a massive room with vaulted ceilings, chandeliers that cast glittering light across everything, and a table long enough to seat 50 people. Members of the High Council were already assembled, dressed in their finest, wearing their authority like armor. Kieran stood at the head of the table, and when he saw me enter, something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe, or something deeper that made my breath catch. Miss Winters, he said formally, though I heard the warmth underneath. Thank you for joining us. He'd placed me to his right, the position of honor, where a queen would sit if he had won. The message was unmistakable, and I saw it register on every face around the table. She's important. She's valued. She's under the king's protection. Your Majesty, I murmured, allowing him to pull out my chair. The dinner began with painful formality. Counselors spoke of trade agreements and border disputes and things I barely understood. I remained quiet, hyper-aware of every eye that flickered toward me, every whispered conversation that stopped when I looked up. Then Calypso's husband, Counselor Valen, addressed Kieran directly. Your Majesty, we've all noticed the remarkable improvement in the young prince's condition. The court is pleased to see him thriving. As am I, Kieran said, his voice carefully neutral. It's quite remarkable, really. Valen's smile didn't reach his eyes. 17 trained specialists failed where 1, Omega, succeeded. It raises interesting questions about what methods were employed. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Miss Winters employed compassion and patience, Kieran said, his voice hardening slightly. Novel concepts, I realize, but remarkably effective. A few counselors chuckled nervously. Valen's smile tightened. Of course, Your Majesty. We're all grateful for the prince's recovery, though some of us wonder about the long-term implications of such an unconventional arrangement. Unconventional how? Kieran's tone was deceptively mild, but I heard the warning underneath. Well, forgive me for speaking plainly, but a rejected Omega living in the royal quarters, dining at the king's right hand, having such influence over the heir to the throne. Valen spread his hands, as if the concerns were self-evident. It's unprecedented. Some might even call it inappropriate. Blood roared in my ears. Every fear I'd been nursing bloomed into full horror. This was it, the moment when my inadequacy would be exposed, when Kieran would realize that keeping me here was damaging his authority, his reputation, everything he'd built. Inappropriate. Kieran repeated the word slowly, dangerously. Tell me, Counselor Valen, what exactly do you find inappropriate? That I employed someone who succeeded where your recommended specialists failed? Do I value results over protocol? Or is it simply that you cannot fathom an Omega being competent? The table went silent. Several counselors looked down at their plates. I meant no offense, Your Majesty. Then you should choose your words more carefully. Kieran's voice could have frozen fire. Miss Winters has done more for my son in a month than anyone else managed in years. She has my trust, my respect, and my gratitude. Anyone who questions her place in this palace answers to me directly. Am I understood? Yes, Your Majesty. But the damage was done. I could feel it in the weighted looks, the carefully blank expressions, the way conversations shifted away from me as if I were contaminated. I made it through the rest of dinner on autopilot, responding when spoken to but feeling like I was drowning, like the walls were closing in, like every whisper was a confirmation of what I'd always known. I didn't belong here. I never would. When Kieran finally dismissed the council and I could escape, I walked quickly through the corridors, fighting tears that threatened to spill over. I'd made it almost to our suite when his voice stopped me. Vesper, wait. I turned to find him striding toward me, concern etched across his features. I'm sorry, he said immediately. Valen was out of line. I should have anticipated. He was right. The words burst out before I could stop them. I don't belong here, Kieran. I'm a rejected Omega playing at being something I'm not. Eventually, everyone will see through it. Even you. That's not true. It is. I felt tears streaming down my face now, all the fear and inadequacy I'd been holding back finally breaking free. My former alpha saw it. Your council sees it. Everyone sees it except you and Caspian, and eventually you will too. You'll see that I'm too weak, too soft, too broken. Stop. His hands gripped my shoulders, gentle but firm. Vesper, look at me. I raised my eyes to his, expecting to see doubt or uncertainty or the first signs of recognition that everyone else had been right about me. Instead, I saw fury, not at me, but for me. You are not weak. You are not soft. And you are certainly not broken. Each word was emphatic, deliberate. You are the strongest person I've ever met. You walked into an impossible situation and succeeded through sheer force of compassion. You stood up to me, an alpha king, when I was wrong. You've given my son his life back and shown me how to be human again. But
No.
his hand cupped my face, thumb brushing away tears. Whatever that alpha told you, whatever poison he poured into your soul, it was a lie. You were never inadequate. He was too blind to see your worth. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let those words heal the wounds that had festered for 2 years. But fear had its claws too deep. What if it happens again? I whispered. What if I fail? What if I'm not enough? Then we'll face it together. His forehead touched mine, and I felt the warmth of his breath against my skin. Vesper, I need you to understand something. You're not just here for Caspian anymore. You're here because He stopped, jaw clenching, as if the next words were too dangerous to speak aloud. But I heard them anyway in the thundering of my heart, in the way his hands trembled slightly against my skin, in the storm of emotions swirling in his gray eyes. And I realized with terrifying clarity that I wasn't the only one who'd fallen. Chapter 10. The cracks widen. I pulled back from Kieran's touch, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might shatter my ribs. Don't, I whispered. Please don't say what I think you're about to say. His hands fell to his sides, but his eyes never left mine, storm gray and intense, full of things I couldn't allow myself to name. Why not? Because it's impossible.
The words tasted like ash.
You're the Alpha King. I'm a rejected Omega. There are laws, protocols, expectations. I don't care about any of that. You should. My voice rose despite myself. Your council already questions my presence here. If they even suspected, I couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't give voice to the scandal that would erupt if anyone knew the king had feelings for someone like me. Vesper. And what about Caspian? I continued desperately. He's finally healing, finally feeling secure. If something happened between us and it ended badly, he'd be the one to suffer. I can't. I won't risk his happiness for something that could never work anyway. Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight with frustration and something that looked like pain. Finally, he nodded slowly. You're right. Of course you're right. His voice was carefully controlled now, emotions locked away behind walls I'd worked so hard to dismantle. Forgive me. It was inappropriate. The formality in his tone hurt worse than anything Counselor Valen had said. Kieran, I didn't mean... It's late. You should rest. He stepped back, creating distance between us that felt like an ocean. I'll see you at breakfast. Then he was gone, walking away with that controlled grace that spoke of authority and power and absolute loneliness. I stood in the empty corridor, tears streaming down my face, and wondered how doing the right thing could feel so much like tearing my own heart out. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake in my bed, not Caspian's closet, not the chair beside him, but my own room in the suite, staring at shadows on the ceiling and replaying every moment, every word, every look. The way Kieran's voice had roughened when he said my name. The gentleness in his touch when he'd wiped away my tears. The storm of emotions in his eyes when he'd almost said, "Stop," I told myself firmly. This path leads nowhere but pain. But my traitorous heart wouldn't listen. It kept circling back to impossible questions. What if the station didn't matter? What if we could be just Kieran and Vesper instead of Alpha King and Reject Omega? What if love was enough?
Love.
The word settled over me like snow, soft, cold, undeniable. I was in love with him. With both of them. With the broken family I'd helped piece back together, with the fierce little boy who'd chosen me when I'd given up on being chosen, with the grieving king who'd learned to feel again. And loving them meant protecting them, even from myself. Morning came too quickly. I dressed mechanically, braided my hair with trembling fingers, and went to wake Caspian for breakfast. He was already awake, sitting up in bed with an expression that was far too knowing for a 3-year-old. You've been crying, he said, matter of fact. I'm fine, sweetheart. You're lying. He tilted his head, studying me with those ancient eyes. Did something bad happen?
No.
Nothing bad happened, just my heart breaking in half. Come on, let's get you dressed. Your father will be here soon for breakfast, but Kieran didn't come. We waited in the main room, the table set with food growing cold, and he didn't come. 20 minutes passed. 30. Finally, Maya appeared with an apologetic expression. His Majesty sends his regrets. An urgent matter requires his attention this morning. He'll try to join you for dinner. The disappointment on Caspian's face was crushing. He's not coming? Not this morning, sweetheart. But we can still have a nice breakfast together. He promised he'd be here. Caspian's voice was small, wounded. He said he wouldn't do this anymore. He said he wouldn't leave me. He's not leaving you. He's just busy. That's what he always says. The anger came swift and hot, old wounds tearing open. He said things would be different, but they're not. He's still choosing everything else over me. Caspian. But he was already running to his room, slamming the door behind him. I heard the closet door open and close, retreating to his old sanctuary, the nest he'd abandoned when he started feeling safe. My fault. This was my fault. I'd pushed Kieran away, and now he was retreating too, putting distance between himself and the feelings he couldn't allow himself to have. And Caspian was paying the price. I knocked softly on his door. Caspian? Can I come in?
No.
Please, sweetheart. Let me explain. Everyone leaves. Everyone promises, and then they leave. Mom left. Dad left. You're going to leave too. Everyone always leaves. The raw pain in his voice shattered me. I opened the door anyway, found him curled in the closet nest with his face buried in the blankets, his small body shaking with sobs. I'm not leaving, I said firmly, settling onto the floor beside the nest. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise. I promise. He lifted his head, and the devastation in his eyes made me want to break things, to scream at the universe for being so cruel to someone so small. Then why is Dad staying away again? Did I do something wrong?
Did you?
Yes, I thought. I fell in love with your father and was too much of a coward to see where it led. Your father is just dealing with some complicated feelings. Adult things that have nothing to do with you. Is it about Mom? Does he miss her again? He always misses her, sweetheart. That doesn't change. But it's not about her this time. Then what? How could I explain this to a child? How could I make him understand that sometimes people pulled away not because they didn't care, but because they cared too much and didn't know how to handle it? Sometimes, I said carefully, when people start to feel things that scare them, they need space to figure out what those feelings mean. It doesn't mean they're abandoning you. It means they're trying to protect you while they sort themselves out. That's stupid. Yeah, I agreed softly. It kind of is. He was quiet for a moment, then shifted in his nest to make room. Will you stay with me? Like before? Of course. I climbed into the closet nest beside him, and he immediately curled against my side, seeking comfort in the way he had those first days. We'd made so much progress, come so far, and now we were back where we started. Except we weren't. Not really. Because Caspian was talking about his feelings instead of lashing out violently. He was seeking comfort instead of isolation. He was expressing his hurt instead of letting it consume him. We'd still made progress. We just had further to go than I'd hoped. The day passed slowly. Kieran didn't appear for lunch either, and Maya delivered another apology, more urgent business, more responsibilities, more walls being rebuilt between us. By dinner time, I was furious. Not at Kieran for being scared or confused or dealing with his feelings, but at him for doing exactly what I'd accused him of before, choosing distance over discomfort, letting his fear hurt the one person who needed him most. When Maya appeared with a third message, I stood abruptly. Where is he? Maya blinked, clearly taken aback by my tone. His Majesty is in his study. Watch Caspian. I need to speak with the king. Miss Winters, I don't think.
Now, Maya.
Please. I didn't wait for her response. I marched through the corridors with fury propelling each step, past startled staff members and curious guards, until I reached the king's study. The guards at the door moved to stop me, but something in my expression made them hesitate. I pushed through the doors without knocking. Kieran stood at his window in his usual position, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over his kingdom. He turned at the sound of the doors, surprise flickering across his face. "Vesper. How dare you?" My voice was quiet, but it cut through the space between us like a blade. "Excuse me? How dare you do this to him?"
To us.
"To yourself." I moved into the room, and I saw him tense, saw the walls slam down behind his eyes. "Last night you practically told me you had feelings for me. And yes, that scared me. It terrified me. But I didn't abandon you. I didn't disappear and break promises to the one person who needs us both. I had responsibilities." "Don't." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Don't lie to me.
Not now.
You weren't dealing with urgent business. You were running away. Again. Just like you've been running for 3 years. His jaw clenched, storm clouds gathering in his eyes. "You're overstepping."
Good.
"Someone needs to." My voice rose, 3 weeks of watching him struggle between fear and love finally breaking through. "You finally opened yourself up, finally let yourself feel something real and vulnerable and human. And the moment it got uncomfortable, the moment those feelings became complicated, you retreated. Exactly like before. Exactly like when your mate died. Don't bring her into this. She's already in it. She's been in it since the beginning." I was shaking now, fury and heartbreak and desperate love all tangled together. "You think you're protecting Caspian by keeping your distance? You think you're making things easier? All you're doing is teaching him that when things get hard, when emotions get messy, the people he loves disappear. I'm trying to do what's right." "No, you're trying to do what's safe. There's a difference." I took a breath, forcing myself to calm down. "Kieran, I understand being scared. I understand not knowing how to handle feelings that don't fit into neat boxes or follow protocol or make logical sense. But Caspian woke up this morning excited to have breakfast with his father. And you broke that promise because you couldn't face me. How is that right?" The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Kieran's hands had curled into fists at his sides, and I saw a dozen emotions war across his face. Anger, shame, recognition, pain. "You're right," he said finally, his voice rough. "I was running. I am running. Because last night I almost told you that he stopped, jaw clenching. That I've developed feelings I have no business having. Feelings that could complicate everything, that could hurt you and Caspian if they went wrong. And by avoiding us, you're not hurting Caspian? I don't know what to do." The words burst out of him, raw and desperate. "I don't know how to be a father and a king and a man who's developed feelings for someone he shouldn't want but can't stop thinking about. I don't know how to balance it all without everything falling apart. Then stop trying to balance it alone." I closed the distance between us, and I saw him tense, saw the way his breathing had quickened. "Stop acting like you have to have all the answers, like showing vulnerability is weakness. You have people who care about you, who want to help you, who—" I stopped myself before I could finish the sentence, before I could say the words that would make this real and irrevocable. But Kieran's eyes had sharpened, seeing too much, understanding what I couldn't say. "Who what, Vesper?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "Finish the sentence." "It doesn't matter." "It does." He stepped closer, and suddenly the air between us was electric, crackling with everything we'd been trying not to acknowledge. "Tell me, who what? Who loves you?" I whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside. "Who love you and your son, and would do anything to keep you both safe and happy, even if it means stepping away." "Don't." His hand reached up, fingers tangling in my hair. "Don't step away. Don't leave. Don't do what I did and run from something that scares you. Kieran, I'm in love with you." The words hung between us, impossible and true. "I've been falling in love with you since the day you contradicted me in my own study, since you showed me how to be human again, since you proved that strength and softness aren't opposites, but two sides of the same coin. And it terrifies me because I lost the last person I loved, because I don't know how to do this again, because I kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't thought through, wasn't any of the careful, logical decisions I'd been trying to make. It was instinct and need, and 3 weeks of fighting something that had been inevitable from the start. His arms came around me immediately, pulling me close, and I felt the desperation in his touch, like he'd been starving and I was sustenance, like he'd been drowning and I was air. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. "This is insane," I whispered. "Completely," he agreed. "Your counsel will lose their minds. Let them. We could ruin everything. Or we could finally build something real." His gray eyes held mine, and I saw everything in them. Fear and hope and love and determination. "I'm tired of running, Vesper. I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. I want to try. If you do." I thought about all the reasons this was impossible. About station and protocol and scandal. About Caspian and what this might mean for him. About my own fears of inadequacy and rejection. And then I thought about the alternative. Walking away from the family I'd found, from the man I loved, from the chance at something beautiful because I was too afraid to believe I deserved it. "I want to try," I said softly. "But we do this carefully. Slowly. Caspian comes first always." "Always," he agreed. "And if it starts to hurt him, if this gets too complicated, we'll figure it out. Together." He kissed me again, gentler this time, like a promise. Together. Chapter 11. Light through the cracks. When I returned to the suite, my lips still tingling and my heart racing with a mixture of terror and joy, I found Caspian sitting on the couch with Maya. He looked up as I entered, and I saw the question in his eyes before he spoke it. "Is Dad coming?" "He is," I said, settling beside him. "He'll be here in a few minutes. He wanted me to tell you how sorry he is for missing breakfast and lunch." "Is he mad at me?"
No, sweetheart.
"Never at you." I pulled him close, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and innocence. He was dealing with some grown-up feelings that got confusing. But we talked, and everything's okay now. "Promise." "Promise." Maya excused herself with a knowing look that made my cheeks flush. How much had she guessed? How much could she tell just by looking at me, at the color in my cheeks, the brightness in my eyes, the way I couldn't stop touching my lips? True to his word, Kieran appeared less than 10 minutes later. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd run his hands through it multiple times, and there was something different in his bearing, less rigid, more open. When Caspian saw him, he hesitated for just a moment, old hurt warring with hope. But then Kieran knelt down, opening his arms, and Caspian ran to him. "I'm sorry," Kieran said, holding his son tight. "I'm so sorry for breaking my promise. There's no excuse for it. I let my own fears get in the way of being the father you deserve." "It's okay," Caspian mumbled against his father's shoulder. "Vesper said you were dealing with confusing feelings." She was right. She usually is. Kieran's eyes found mine over Caspian's head, and I saw everything in them, gratitude and love, and a vulnerability that took my breath away. "But that doesn't make it okay to disappear when you were counting on me. Are the confusing feelings gone now?" "No," Kieran said honestly. "But I'm learning that having confusing feelings doesn't mean I have to run away from the people I love. Sometimes the brave thing is staying and working through them." Caspian pulled back, looking at his father with those ancient eyes. "Vesper says brave people feel scared but do things anyway. Vesper is very wise." "She is," Caspian agreed solemnly. Then, with the mercurial emotional shifts only children can manage, "Can we have dinner now? I'm really hungry." Dinner was different than it had been before. There was a new ease between Kieran and me, glances that lasted a moment too long, smiles that held secret meaning, the accidental brush of fingers when passing dishes that sent electricity up my spine. Caspian noticed, of course. Children always notice. "Why do you keep looking at Vesper like that?" he asked his father, fork halfway to his mouth. Kieran nearly choked on his wine. Like what? Like she's a present you want to open, but you're waiting for the right time. I couldn't help it. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise all of us. Kieran's lips twitched, fighting a smile. That's a very specific observation, he said carefully. Am I wrong? Kieran looked at me, questioning in his eyes. We'd agreed to go slowly, to put Caspian first, to be careful. But we'd also agreed to stop hiding, to stop letting fear make our decisions. No, Kieran said finally. You're not wrong. I care about Vesper very much. Is that okay with you? Caspian considered this, chewing thoughtfully. Like how you cared about Mom? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. This was the moment, the test of whether Caspian could accept someone new in his father's life, without feeling like it was a betrayal of his mother's memory. Different, Kieran said gently. What I felt for your mother was unique and special, and nothing will ever replace it. But that doesn't mean I can't care about someone else too. Love isn't finite, Caspian. Having new love doesn't diminish the old love. It just makes your heart bigger. Like how I love you and Vesper, but differently? Exactly like that. Caspian nodded slowly, processing. Then, good. Because I like when Vesper's happy. And she's been sad lately. I think caring about her makes her happy, so you should keep doing it. The simple, childlike logic of it made my throat tight with emotion. Out of the mouths of babes, cutting through all our complex fears and doubts to the simple truth underneath. I'll keep doing it, Kieran promised, his eyes on me. If she'll let me. I'll let you, I whispered. After dinner, we settled in Caspian's room for the nightly ritual of stories. Kieran sat on the edge of the bed while I curled in the chair nearby, and we took turns weaving tales of brave knights and clever queens and wolves who learned that being different didn't mean being broken. Caspian's eyes grew heavy, his questions becoming fewer and further between. Finally, his breathing evened out into sleep, peaceful, untroubled, secure. Kieran stood carefully, tucking the blankets around his son with movements that were becoming more confident, more natural. Then he crossed to where I sat and extended his hand. Walk with me? We moved quietly through the suite into the main room, where the fire had burned down to embers and moonlight streamed through the windows. Kieran pulled me close, and I rested my head against his chest, hearing the steady thump of his heart beneath my ear. I've been thinking, he said quietly, about how to do this right. How to be honest about what's developing between us without causing scandal or putting you in a difficult position. And what did you conclude? That I don't care what the council thinks. That you make me happy in a way I didn't think I'd ever be again. And that if they have a problem with me caring about an extraordinary woman, they can take it up with me directly. I pulled back to look at him. Kieran, that's very romantic, but we need to be practical. Your position is mine to use as I see fit. His hand cupped my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone. I've spent 3 years being practical. Be careful. Doing what everyone expected me to do. And all it brought me was loneliness and a son who thought I didn't love him. But the council can adapt or find new positions. His voice was firm, carrying the weight of command. I'm not asking for their permission, Vesper. I'm informing them of how things are going to be. You can't just. I can. I'm the Alpha King. That actually means something. He smiled, but there was steel underneath. Besides, they've already been whispering. Let them whisper louder. Let them see that you're not some temporary distraction, but someone I value. Someone who belongs here. Belongs. The words settled over me like sunlight breaking through clouds. What about Caspian? I asked. He seems okay with this now, but what if? Then we'll deal with it. Together. That's what you keep trying to teach me, isn't it? That running from difficult things doesn't make them go away. I couldn't argue with that. Mostly because he was right and partly because he was kissing me again, stealing whatever protests I might have raised. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. Stay with me tonight, he said softly. Not for anything improper. Just stay. I've spent too many nights alone, and I don't want to be alone anymore. Every practical bone in my body screamed that this was moving too fast, that we should be more careful, that scandal and gossip and propriety all demanded we maintain distance. But I was tired of being practical, tired of letting fear make my decisions. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll stay." We checked on Caspian one more time, still sleeping peacefully, one arm wrapped around a stuffed wolf he'd finally started accepting comfort from. Then Kieran led me to his private chambers. The room was surprisingly simple for an alpha king. Large, yes, but not ostentatious. A massive bed dominated one wall, bookshelves lined another, and a fire crackled in the hearth. Personal touches were scattered throughout. A worn leather chair that looked like it had been read in for years, a painting of the late Queen on one wall that made my heart ache, papers stacked on a desk that spoke of late-night work and early morning responsibility. This was where he lived when he wasn't being the king, where he was just Kieran. "You can take the bed," he said, suddenly awkward in a way that was endearing. "I'll take the chair." "Don't be ridiculous." I moved to the bed, pulling back the covers. "It's big enough for both of us. And you promised nothing improper, remember?" I did. We lay down on opposite sides of that massive bed, a careful distance between us. For a long moment, neither of us moved or spoke. Then Kieran's hand found mine in the darkness, fingers intertwining. "Tell me about the sanctuary," he said quietly. "About what happened before you came here. I want to know everything." So I told him. About being rejected at 19, about the shame that had consumed me, about arriving at the sanctuary hollow and broken, about learning to be invisible because it was safer than being seen, about the 2 years I'd spent convinced I was fundamentally flawed, unworthy of love or connection or belonging. And he listened, not just hearing the words, but truly listening, asking questions, offering comfort, understanding in a way that made me feel seen for the first time in years. When I finished, tears streaming down my face in the darkness, he pulled me close. "He was wrong," Kieran said fiercely. "You're alpha." He was blind and stupid and wrong. "You're not weak. You're not inadequate. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and I'm grateful every day that he was fool enough to let you go. Because it meant you were free when I needed you most." "I'm scared," I admitted, "that this is too good to be true. That I'll wake up and it will all be a dream. That you'll eventually see what he saw and never." His arms tightened around me. "I see you, Vesper. All of you. The softness and the strength, the fear and the courage, the scars and the beauty. And I love all of it. All of you." The words hung in the darkness, simple and perfect and terrifying. "I love you too," I whispered, saying it out loud for the first time. "I've been trying not to, trying to convince myself it was impossible, but I love you. Both of you. You and Caspian, you're my family now." "Then stay. Not just for Caspian, not just as a caregiver. Stay as part of this family. Stay as mine." Mine. The possessiveness in the word should have scared me. Instead, it made me feel cherished. Claimed. Like I finally belonged somewhere after years of wandering. "Yours," I agreed softly. "If you're mine too. Always." We fell asleep like that, tangled together in the darkness. Two broken people who'd somehow found wholeness in each other. And for the first time in 3 years, Kieran slept through the night without nightmares. For the first time in 2 years, I slept without fear. And in his room down the hall, Caspian slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that the two people he loved most weren't going anywhere. Morning came with soft light and the realization that everything had changed. I woke to find Kieran already awake, watching me with an expression so tender it made my heart ache. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning." I started to move, to create distance, to remember all the reasons we should be careful. But he pulled me back. "Don't. Not yet. Just stay a little longer." So I did, nestling back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my ear. "We should probably get up," I said eventually. "Caspian will be waking soon, and if he finds me gone, he'll probably come looking for us and jump to exactly the right conclusions." Kieran smiled against my hair. Are you ready for that conversation? Are you? With you beside me? I'm ready for anything. We rose and dressed, me in yesterday's clothes, which felt like a declaration in itself. When we entered Caspian's room, we found him already awake, sitting up in bed with a knowing expression that was far too mature for his age. You stayed with Dad last night, he said, not a question but a statement. I did. I confirmed, bracing for questions or concerns or upset. Instead, Caspian smiled, bright and genuine and full of a hope I'd never seen before.
Good.
That means you're really staying. Forever. Forever. That impossible word again. But as Kieran's hand found mine and Caspian bounded out of bed to wrap his arms around both our legs, I thought maybe, just maybe, forever wasn't impossible after all. Maybe it was just beginning. Chapter 12. When Walls Come Down. The next 2 weeks passed in a golden haze of happiness I'd never imagined possible. Kieran was true to his word. He didn't hide what was developing between us. He took meals with us daily, walked with me through the palace gardens while Caspian played, held my hand in corridors where staff could see, made it abundantly clear through 1,000 small gestures that I wasn't just Caspian's caregiver anymore. I was his. The palace responded exactly as I'd feared, and somehow better than I'd hoped. Yes, there were whispers. How could there not be? But there were also smiles from staff members who seemed genuinely happy to see their king coming back to life. Maya became an unexpected ally, running interference with the more judgmental members of the household and ensuring our privacy when needed. Caspian thrived. With both of us present and committed, he transformed from a wounded, angry child into someone who laughed freely and asked endless questions and was learning that love didn't always end in loss. He still had nightmares occasionally, still struggled with grief and fear. But he was learning to voice those feelings instead of letting them consume him, to reach for comfort instead of isolation. We were healing, all three of us. But I should have known it couldn't last. Should have remembered that happiness like ours always came with a price. The storm broke on a Thursday afternoon when I was least expecting it. Caspian and I were in the greenhouse among the moonflower roses, reading together in a patch of sunlight. He was curled against my side, his small finger tracing the words on the page as I read aloud, when Maya appeared with an expression that made my stomach drop. Miss Winters, His Majesty requests your immediate presence in the throne room. The throne room. Not his study, not the private chambers, but the formal seat of his power, where he conducted official business and passed judgment. Is something wrong? Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. The High Council has called an emergency session. They have concerns they wish to address. Ice flooded my veins. This was it, the reckoning I'd been dreading. The moment when reality crashed through our golden bubble and reminded me exactly who I was and who I could never be. Can you stay with Caspian? I asked, proud that my voice remained steady. Of course. I kissed Caspian's forehead, breathing in assent. I'll be back soon, sweetheart. Where are you going? Just to talk to your father and some other grown-ups. Nothing to worry about. But his ancient eyes saw right through me. You're scared. A little, I admitted. But remember what we said about being brave? Brave people feel scared, but do things anyway. Exactly. I hugged him tight. I love you, Caspian. Love you too, Vesper. The throne room was exactly as imposing as I'd imagined. Massive vaulted ceilings, stone columns carved with the history of the kingdom, and at the far end, the obsidian throne itself. Kieran sat upon it in full formal regalia, looking every inch the Alpha King, powerful, remote, untouchable. But when his eyes found mine across the distance, I saw warmth there, reassurance.
Love.
The High Council was assembled before the throne, 12 members in formal robes, their expressions ranging from disapproving to openly hostile. Councillor Valen stood at the center, that same calculating look I'd seen at dinner weeks ago. Miss Winters, Kieran said, his voice formal but not cold. Thank you for coming. The High Council has requested this audience to discuss matters concerning the royal household. Your Majesty. I approached and bowed, hyper-aware of every eye on me, every whisper that stopped when I drew near. Your Majesty, Valen began, his voice carrying through the cavernous space. We've called this session out of deep concern for the kingdom and for your own well-being. I'm listening, Kieran said, though I heard the warning underneath. It has come to our attention that you have developed an inappropriate relationship with the young prince's caregiver. Valen's pause before inappropriate was deliberate, loaded with judgment. A rejected Omega with no status, no training, no bloodline worthy of... Careful, counselor. Kieran's voice cut through like a blade. You're speaking about someone under my direct protection. Which is precisely the problem, Your Majesty. Another counselor stepped forward, a woman named Thorn with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. Your protection of this Omega has gone far beyond what's appropriate for a caregiver. She's been seen holding your hand in public corridors, dining at your side in positions reserved for royalty, spending nights in your private chambers. Heat flooded my face. So they'd been watching, cataloging every moment, every touch, every breach of protocol. What I do in my private chambers is none of your concern, Kieran said, his voice dangerously quiet. It is when it affects the kingdom. Valen's voice rose. You are not just a man, Your Majesty. You are the Alpha King. Your choices set precedent, influence policy, shape the future of our people. And you choose to consort with a rejected Omega? It's beneath you. It weakens your authority. Enough. The word cracked through the throne room like thunder. Kieran stood, and I felt the full weight of his dominance wash over everyone present. Several counselors actually took a step back. You will not speak of her that way. Not in my presence. Not ever. Your Majesty, we mean no disrespect to Miss Winters herself, Thorn said, though her tone suggested otherwise. But you must see the reason. The kingdom needs a strong queen at your side, someone of noble blood who can unite the packs, strengthen alliances, provide legitimate heirs. I have an heir. Kieran's voice was ice. A troubled child who was on the verge of being unmanageable before she arrived. Valen interjected. Yes, she's helped him. We acknowledge that. But surely you see that her usefulness as a caregiver doesn't qualify her for anything more. Something inside me cracked. Not shattered. I'd been shattered before and survived. But cracked like ice splitting under weight. Because they were right, weren't they? I was useful as a caregiver, but nothing more. I had no bloodline, no status, no way to strengthen Kieran's position or help him rule. I was exactly what my former alpha had seen. Too weak, too soft, too inadequate. The council proposes a compromise, Thorn continued. Miss Winters may remain as the prince's caregiver. We see no reason to disrupt the child's progress. But this romantic entanglement must end. And Your Majesty should begin considering appropriate matches from the noble families. We've compiled a list. I don't want your list. Kieran's voice was deadly calm now, the kind of calm that preceded storms. And I don't want your compromise. Your Majesty.
No.
He descended from the throne, moving toward me with predatory grace. You come into my throne room and insult the woman I love. You question her worth based on circumstances beyond her control. You reduce her to her status as a rejected Omega, as if that defines her value. And you expect me to agree to your terms?
Love.
He'd said it out loud, in front of the entire council. Made it public, real, undeniable. Your Majesty, Valen's voice had taken on a pleading quality. We're trying to protect you, to protect the kingdom. Surely you see that this infatuation is not an infatuation. Kieran reached me, taking my hand in his. Vesper is the strongest, most courageous person I've ever met. She succeeded where 17 specialists failed. She taught me how to be human again, how to be a father to my son. She's shown me that love doesn't end with loss, that it's possible to build something new without betraying what came before. She's a rejected Omega, Thorn said, as if that trumped everything. She was rejected by a blind fool who couldn't see her worth. Kieran's grip on my hand tightened, and I won't make the same mistake. The throne room went silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud as thunder in my ears. "What are you saying, Your Majesty?" Valen asked carefully. Kieran looked at me, and I saw the question in his eyes, not asking permission, but making sure I was ready for what came next. I wasn't. I'd never be ready for this. But I nodded anyway because brave people felt scared and did things anyway. Kieran turned back to the council, his voice ringing with authority. "I'm saying that Vesper Winters will not remain just a caregiver. I'm saying that I intend to court her properly, with every honor and respect she deserves. And if she'll have me, when she'll have me, I intend to make her my queen." The silence that followed was absolute.
Shocked.
Disbelieving. Then the throne room erupted. "This is madness. Your Majesty, you cannot be serious. The law clearly states, the noble families will never accept." Kieran's dominance crashed over them like a wave, silencing every protest. "I am the Alpha King. I make the laws. I decide what's acceptable. And I have decided that this woman, this extraordinary, courageous, perfect woman, is worthy of standing beside me. If you cannot accept that, you are welcome to tender your resignation." Several counselors looked like they might actually do it, but Valen, ever the politician, was the first to recover. "Your Majesty, even if we were to accept this unprecedented decision, the noble families will fall in line or find themselves without access to the throne." Kieran's voice was implacable. "I've wasted 3 years trying to be what everyone expected, trying to rule without feeling, to lead without being human. And all it brought me was misery. Vesper gave me back my life, gave me back my son. And I will not let protocol or politics or your narrow-minded prejudice take her from me." Counselor Thorns stepped forward, her expression calculating. "And what of heirs, Your Majesty? You said yourself that Caspian is your heir, but the kingdom needs stability. What it needs is a king who leads with both strength and compassion." Kieran's voice softened slightly. "What it needs is a queen who understands that true power comes from lifting others up, not keeping them down. Vesper has already proven herself as a mother to my son. Any other children we might have will be blessed by her love and guidance." Children. He was talking about a future, our future, as if it was real and possible and already decided. "Your Majesty," I whispered, finding my voice for the first time. "You don't have to do this. I don't need a crown or a title. I'm happy just being." "Don't." He turned to me, cupping my face in his hands. "Don't diminish yourself. Don't accept less than you deserve because they've convinced you that you're not worthy. You are worthy, Vesper. You're worthy of love and respect and every honor I can give you. But they're right about some things," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know politics or diplomacy or... You know how to love fiercely and protect courageously and lead with compassion." His thumb brushed away my tears. "Everything else can be learned. But those things, those essential things, can't be taught. And you have them in abundance. The kingdom will resist. Then we'll show them why they're wrong. Together." He kissed my forehead, gentle and reverent. "If you want this. If you want us. I'm not asking you to decide right now, not asking you to say yes immediately. I'm just asking you not to say no out of fear." I looked past him at the council, at their disapproving faces and calculating expressions and barely concealed horror at the thought of a rejected Omega as their queen. Then I looked back at Kieran and saw only love, only certainty, only a man who'd chosen me despite every reason not to. "I need time," I said quietly. "Not because I don't love you, but because it's so much bigger than us. I need to think about what it means for Caspian, for the kingdom, for..." "Take all the time you need," he said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." The council was dismissed with thinly veiled threats about what would happen if word of this session reached beyond the throne room. But I knew it would spread anyway. Secrets like this never stayed buried. Kieran walked me back to our suite in silence, his hand never leaving mine. When we reached the doors, I turned to him. "Did you mean it?" I asked. "All of it? Because if this is just some Some grand gesture to prove a point to the council. Vesper. He tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his eyes. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. I want to watch Caspian grow up with you, by my side. I want to build something beautiful out of all this brokenness. And yes, I want you as my queen. Not because I need to prove anything to the council, but because you're the only person I can imagine ruling beside me. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. You're the strongest person I know. He kissed me, slow and deep and full of promise. And you won't be alone. You'll have me. You'll have Caspian. You'll have people who love you and will fight for you. What about the people who won't? We'll deal with them. Together. That word again. Together. I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, trying to imagine a future where I was queen, where a rejected Omega stood beside the Alpha King and ruled a kingdom that had spent centuries believing people like me were worthless. It seemed impossible. But then again, 3 months ago, it had seemed impossible that I'd find a family who loved me, that I'd heal a broken child and help a grieving father find himself again, that I'd fall in love with an Alpha King and have him love me back. Impossible things happen every day. Maybe this could be one of them. Chapter 13. The Storm Before the Dawn. Word spread through the palace like wildfire, just as I'd known it would. By evening, every staff member, every guard, every noble visiting the court had heard some version of what had transpired in the throne room. The whispers followed me everywhere, in corridors and courtyards, even in the sanctuary of our suite where I could hear them echoing from beyond the walls. The king wants to make her queen, a rejected Omega on the obsidian throne. It's madness. Unprecedented. Scandalous. Some voices were merely curious. Others were openly hostile. And a few, a precious few, sounded almost hopeful, as if the idea of someone rising from rejection to royalty resonated with their own hidden dreams. Caspian sensed the tension immediately. Children always do. Why is everyone acting weird? He asked at dinner, pushing food around his plate without eating. Kieran had joined us, but even his presence couldn't fully dispel the anxiety hanging over us like storm clouds. The grown-ups are having disagreements about some decisions I've made, Kieran said carefully. It's nothing for you to worry about. Is it about Vesper? Those ancient eyes missed nothing. Are they mad that you love her? Kieran and I exchanged glances. We've been trying to shield him from the political fallout, but clearly that was impossible. Some of them are, Kieran admitted. They don't think it's appropriate for me to be with someone who is rejected by another pack. That's stupid. Caspian's voice was fierce, protective. Vesper is the best. Her old alpha was the stupid one. I agree, Kieran said softly, but not everyone sees it that way. Then they're all stupid too. Caspian looked at me, fear flickering in his eyes. You're not going to leave because of them, are you? You promised you wouldn't leave. My heart clenched. I'm not leaving, sweetheart. I promise. But what if they make you? What if they say you have to go? No one can make her do anything, Kieran said firmly. This is my kingdom, and I've made it very clear that Vesper is under my protection. She's not going anywhere unless she chooses to. Unless I chose to. That was the question that had been haunting me since the throne room. Not whether I loved them, not whether I wanted to stay, but whether staying was the right thing for everyone involved. That night, after Caspian finally fell asleep, fitfully with more nightmares than he'd had in weeks, I found myself standing at the window of the main room, staring out at the city below. Kieran appeared behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. Talk to me, he said quietly. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking that maybe the council is right. His arms tightened. Vesper. Not about me being worthless, I interrupted. But about this being complicated. About the resistance we'll face. About whether it's fair to Caspian to put him through the scandal, to make him watch while people tear apart the two people he loves most. He's stronger than you think. I know he is. But he's also 3 years old and still healing from trauma. I turned in his arms to face him. What if this breaks him again? What if the stress of everyone judging us, questioning us, makes him retreat back into that closet nest? Then we'll help him through it, like we always do. But what if we can't? My voice broke. What if loving each other ends up hurting him? I couldn't live with myself, Kieran. I'd rather walk away than watch him shatter, because of us. You think leaving wouldn't shatter him? Kieran's voice was rough. Vesper, you're his mother in every way that matters. If you left now, it would destroy him far more than any scandal ever could. I'm not his mother. His mother died. And you brought him back to life. Kieran's hands framed my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. You gave him love and security and showed him that the world could be safe again. You are his mother. And he needs you, scandal or not, council approval or not. We both need you. I need you too, I whispered. That's what terrifies me. I need you both so much that I'm afraid I'm not thinking clearly, that I'm being selfish by staying when leaving might be better for everyone. It wouldn't be better. It would be devastating. His forehead touched mine. Please don't do this. Don't run because you're scared. Don't make decisions based on what the council thinks or what society expects. Make them based on what you want, what you need, what your heart tells you is right. My heart says stay. My heart says build a life with you and Caspian and damn the consequences. Tears streamed down my face. But my head says that's selfish. That a good person would step aside and let you find someone who could actually help you rule, someone the kingdom would accept. I don't want someone the kingdom would accept. I want you. His voice was fierce, desperate. I want the woman who stood up to me when I was wrong, who loved my son when he was unlovable, who showed me that grief doesn't have to mean the end of feeling. I want you, Vesper. Only you. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let his certainty wash away all my doubts and fears. But the weight of reality was crushing. The hostile stares, the whispered judgments, the knowledge that my presence was causing division in a kingdom that needed unity. I need time, I said again. Please, Kieran. Just give me time to think. Pain flickered across his face, but he nodded. Take all the time you need. Just promise me you won't disappear without talking to me first. Promise me you won't run. I promise. But even as I said it, I wondered if it was a promise I could keep. The next morning brought a new complication, one I should have anticipated, but somehow hadn't. A messenger arrived at our suite with a formal summons. Not from the High Council this time, but from someone far more dangerous, the gathered noble families who'd come to court for the winter season. They requested an audience with me, just me, to discuss matters of mutual concern. Kieran was furious when he heard. Absolutely not. It's a trap. They'll try to intimidate you, convince you to leave, maybe even threaten you. Which is exactly why I should go, I said calmly, though my hands were shaking. If I hide behind you, if I let you fight all my battles, I'll never be able to stand as your equal. I'll always be the weak Omega who needed the king's protection. You're not weak. I know, but they think I am. And the only way to change their minds is to face them myself. Then I'm coming with you. No. I placed my hand on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath my palm. This is something I have to do alone. Trust me, Kieran. Please.
He didn't want to.
Every alpha instinct in him rebelled against letting me walk into danger without his protection. But he also understood what I was asking, for the chance to prove myself, not just to them, but to myself. I'll be right outside the doors, he said finally. One sound of distress, and I'm coming in. Deal. The audience chamber was smaller than the throne room, but no less imposing. 12 noble alphas sat in a semicircle, each representing one of the major pack families. Their expressions ranged from curious to openly contemptuous. At the center sat Lady Isadora, matriarch of the Silver Moon Pack and rumored to be the most influential noblewoman in the kingdom. She was ancient, probably in her 70s, with silver hair that fell to her waist and eyes that seemed to see straight through to the soul. Miss Winters, she said, her voice surprisingly strong for someone her age. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Lady Isadora. I bowed respectfully, though not as deeply as an Omega traditionally would. A small rebellion, but an important one. How may I serve? Directly to the point. I appreciate that. She studied me for a long moment. We've called you here to understand your intentions regarding His Majesty. My intentions are to support him and his son to the best of my ability. And do those intentions include becoming queen? This from Lord Theron, a bull of a man with a scar across his face. Because if so, we need to make some things clear. Please do. You're a rejected Omega. He said it like a curse. No bloodline, no pact ties, no training in governance or diplomacy. You're completely unsuited for the role you're aspiring to. I'm not aspiring to anything, I said calmly, though my heart was racing. His Majesty made his intentions clear, but I haven't accepted or declined. Then decline. Lady Isadora's voice was sharp. Gracefully, before the situation becomes any messier. We're prepared to offer you significant compensation, a comfortable estate, financial security for life, even a position managing one of the northern sanctuaries if you wish. All we ask is that you step aside and allow the king to make a more appropriate match. They were trying to buy me off. Politely, expensively, but unmistakably trying to remove me from Kieran's life. And if I refuse, then you'll face opposition at every turn. Lord Theron leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. Every noble family, every pack, every alpha who values tradition will work against you. You'll be isolated, ostracized, made miserable. Is that really what you want? What I want, I said carefully, is what's best for Caspian and his father. What's best for this kingdom? Then you'll refuse the king's suit. Lady Isadora's eyes were hard. Because what's best for the kingdom is stability, and you represent chaos. A rejected Omega as queen would undermine centuries of tradition, would embolden the lower classes to challenge their stations, would weaken the very structure that holds our society together. Or it might show that worth isn't determined by birth. The words came out stronger than I felt. That someone can rise above rejection to build something meaningful. That compassion and courage matter more than bloodlines. Idealistic nonsense, Theron spat. You're a child playing politics you don't understand. Perhaps. I met his eyes steadily. But I understand love. I understand loyalty. I understand what it means to protect someone with everything you have. And I understand that Caspian needs stability more than this kingdom needs its traditions intact. The boy is thriving. We acknowledge that, Lady Isadora said. Which is why we're offering you the position at the sanctuary. You can continue your work with traumatized children, make a real difference in the world, without disrupting the political order. It was tempting. More tempting than they knew. A life where I could help others, where I'd be valued for my skills, where I wouldn't be constantly judged and found wanting. A life without the man I loved. Without the child who'd claimed my heart. Without the family I'd found after years of loneliness. I need to think about it, I said finally. Think quickly. Theron's voice was hard. Because if you force our hand, if you insist on pursuing this madness, we will make your life a living hell. And His Majesty won't be able to protect you from everything. Accidents happen. People get hurt. Especially people who don't know their place. The threat was clear, barely disguised. Lady Isadora shot Theron a quelling look. What Lord Theron means is that this path will be difficult. More difficult than you can imagine. Ask yourself, is your happiness worth the pain it will cause? Is your love worth the chaos it will bring? The question haunted me as I left the chamber, as I walked past Kieran, who immediately sensed something was wrong, as I returned to our suite where Caspian was playing with blocks. Was my happiness worth the chaos? Was love worth fighting for when the cost might be too high? I didn't know anymore. That night, I lay awake long after everyone else had fallen asleep. Kieran had tried to get me to talk about the meeting, but I deflected, claiming exhaustion. I couldn't tell him about the threats. Couldn't let him know how scared I actually was. Because I was terrified. Not of physical danger, though Theron's thinly veiled threat had shaken me, but of failing. Of being the weak link that brought down everything Kieran had built. of watching Caspin suffer because I'd been too selfish to walk away. Around midnight, I slipped out of bed and went to check on Caspin. He was sleeping fitfully, his small face scrunched in distress. As I watched, he whimpered, "Vesper, don't go. Please don't go." Even in his dreams, he was afraid of losing me. I climbed into bed beside him, pulling him close. He immediately relaxed, burrowing into my side with the trust of a child who'd finally found safety. And I realized something profound. I couldn't leave. Not because of Kieran, not because of love or promises, or any of the things I'd been agonizing over. But because this child, this fierce, wounded, beautiful child, needed me. And maybe that was enough. Maybe being needed, being loved, being part of something bigger than myself was worth fighting for. Even if the fight was impossible. Even if the odds were stacked against us. Even if the whole world said it was wrong. Maybe love was worth the chaos after all. Chapter 14, New Beginnings. Morning came with Caspian still curled against my side, his breathing steady and peaceful. When his eyes fluttered open and found me there, a smile broke across his face, genuine, unguarded, full of the security he'd fought so hard to find. "You stayed," he said softly. "I'll always stay," I promised. And this time, I meant it with every fiber of my being. We found Kieran in the main room, standing at the window with his shoulders tense. He turned when he heard us, and I saw the fear in his eyes. Fear that I'd made a decision, that I'd chosen to walk away. "Caspin, sweetheart," I said gently. "Can you go get dressed? I need to talk to your father for a moment." He looked between us with those knowing eyes, then nodded. "You're going to stay, right? You're going to say yes?" Out of the mouths of children, seeing the truth before the adults could name it. "Go get dressed," I repeated softly. "We'll talk after." Once he was gone, Kieran crossed to me in 3 long strides. "What did they say to you yesterday? What did they threaten?" "It doesn't matter." "It does. Vesper, I can see it in your eyes. You barely slept. You've been terrified. Tell me what they said."
So I did.
I told him about the bribes, the threats, Lady Isadora's cold calculation, and Lord Theron's barely veiled violence. I told him about the promise of isolation and opposition, about how they'd made it clear that choosing this path would mean choosing war. With each word, I watched Kieran's expression darken until storm clouds gathered in his gray eyes. "I'll destroy them," he said quietly, and the promise in his voice was absolute. "Every single one who threatened you. I'll strip their titles, seize their lands."
No.
I placed my hand on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath my palm. "That's exactly what they expect. That's how they'll paint you as a lovesick fool who's abandoning reason for an Omega. We can't give them that ammunition."
Then what do you suggest?
"That we let them terrorize you? That we back down?"
No.
"I suggest we fight smarter." I took a breath, steadying myself. I've been thinking all night about what Lady Isadora said, about how my becoming queen would undermine tradition, would embolden the lower classes to challenge their stations. She's afraid of change. They all are.
Yes. But what if that's not a bad thing?
I looked up at him, an idea crystallizing in my mind. What if we use their fear against them? What if instead of fighting tradition, we transform it? I'm listening. The rejected Omega sanctuaries. There are dozens of them across the kingdom, full of people who've been cast aside for being too weak, too soft, too different. What if we reformed them? Made them centers of training and opportunity instead of prisons for the unwanted? Kieran's eyes widened slightly. "You want to give rejected Omegas a purpose. Options beyond just surviving." "Exactly. And what if we open positions in the royal household to people based on merit instead of bloodline? Started appointing advisors and officials who've proven their worth through actions rather than inherited titles." I was speaking faster now, excitement building. "The nobles are afraid I'll disrupt their comfortable hierarchy. So let's disrupt it, but strategically, systematically, in ways that make the kingdom stronger." "You want to start a revolution?" A slow smile spread across Kieran's face. "You want to use your position to fundamentally reshape society?" I want to prove that being rejected doesn't mean being worthless. That softness can be strength. That the kingdom can be better than it is. I paused. If you'll let me. If you still want me after knowing that accepting your proposal means signing up for years of political warfare. Vesper. He cupped my face in his hands, and I saw everything in his eyes. Love and admiration and fierce pride. I've never wanted anything more. You're not just agreeing to be my queen. You're agreeing to be my partner in rebuilding this kingdom into something worthy of you. Something worthy of all of us. I corrected. Every rejected Omega. Every child told they're not good enough. Every person who's been made to feel small. Then we do it together. He kissed me, deep and claiming and full of promise. We face the nobles, we weather the storms, and we build something beautiful out of all this brokenness. Together, I agreed. The door to Caspian's room burst open, and he came running out, still in his pajamas. Does this mean you're saying yes? Does this mean you're staying forever? I knelt down, opening my arms. He crashed into me with the force of a small hurricane, wrapping his arms around my neck. Yes, sweetheart. I'm saying yes. I'm staying forever. And you're going to be my mom? Really my mom? The question stole my breath. I looked up at Kieran and saw him nod encouragingly. If you want me to be, I said softly. I know I can't replace your first mom. She'll always be special. Always be. I know. Caspian pulled back to look at me seriously. She's in my heart. But there's room for you too. Hearts are big like that. Tears streamed down my face. Then yes, I'd be honored to be your mom. And Dad's queen. That too. Good. He hugged me tighter. Because I already told the Moonflower Roses you were staying. And you can't break promises to flowers. That's like a rule. Kieran laughed, a real, genuine laugh full of joy, and pulled both of us into his arms. We stood there in the morning light, three broken people who'd somehow found wholeness in each other, and I felt something settle deep in my chest. This was home. This was family. This was where I belonged. The formal announcement came 3 days later. Kieran called the High Council, the noble families, and every person of influence in the kingdom to the throne room. I stood beside him, not behind, not in the shadows, but at his side, wearing a dress of deep midnight blue that Maya had insisted made me look like royalty. The crowd was massive, hostile, buzzing with speculation and barely concealed disapproval. Kieran raised his hand, and silence fell like a curtain. I've called you here today to make an official announcement, he said, his voice carrying through the vast space. And to make some changes to how this kingdom operates. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Beside me, I felt Caspian squeeze my hand. Kieran had insisted he be present for this, and had said the kingdom needed to see them as a family. 3 months ago, I was a broken man raising a broken child in a broken household. I'd lost my mate, lost my ability to feel, lost my connection to the one person who mattered most. I tried everything to help my son, hired the best specialists, followed every recommendation, done everything the experts suggested, and nothing worked. He paused, letting the words sink in. Then Vesper Winters arrived. A rejected Omega with no training, no status, no reason to believe she could succeed where others had failed. And she did what 17 specialists couldn't do. She loved my son, unconditionally. She showed me how to be human again. She reminded me that strength and softness aren't opposites but partners. I felt every eye in the room shift to me, assessing, judging, trying to understand. Today, I'm announcing my intention to court Miss Winters with every honor and respect befitting a future queen. And before any of you object, let me be clear. This is not a request for your approval. This is a statement of fact. The room erupted in protests, but Kieran's dominance crashed over them like a wave, silencing every voice. However, he continued, I understand your concerns. You worry that having a rejected Omega as queen will disrupt tradition, will weaken the kingdom's structure. And you're right, it will disrupt tradition. That's exactly the point. He gestured to me, and I stepped forward, my heart hammering but my voice steady. I come from nothing, I said, and my voice carried farther than I had thought possible. I was rejected, cast aside, told I was too weak to be of value. I spent 2 years believing that was true. But then I was given a chance, not because of my bloodline or my status, but because of what I could offer. Compassion, understanding, the ability to see someone's pain and help them heal. I looked out at the sea of faces, some hostile, some curious, a few cautiously hopeful. His Majesty and I are proposing reforms to the rejected Omega sanctuaries. We want to transform them from places of exile into centers of training and opportunity. We want to open positions in the royal household based on merit rather than birth. We want to build a kingdom where your worth is determined by your actions, not your parentage. This is madness. Lord Theron's voice boomed from the crowd. You'll tear apart the very fabric of our society. We'll evolve it, Kieran corrected firmly. The kingdom has stood for centuries on tradition. But tradition without progress becomes stagnant. We're not destroying what our ancestors built. We're building on it, making it stronger, more just, more worthy of the people we serve. Lady Isadora stood, her silver hair catching the light. For a long moment, she said nothing, just studied me with those penetrating eyes. You have courage, child, she said finally. More courage than sense, perhaps. But courage nonetheless. She turned to Kieran. Your Majesty, you're asking us to accept radical change, to trust that this experiment won't destabilize everything we've built. I'm asking you to trust me, Kieran said, as you trusted my father and his father before him, to trust that I have the kingdom's best interests at heart, even when the path I'm choosing looks different than you expected. And if we refuse, then you're welcome to leave my court and return to your estates. But know this, I will move forward with or without your support. The choice is whether you'll be part of building this new future or clinging to a past that's already dying. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with possibility and danger in equal measure. Then, unexpectedly, a voice came from the back of the room. I'll support you, Your Majesty. I turned to see a younger noble, couldn't have been more than 30, step forward. I'm Lord Cashin of the Eastern Territories, and I've seen firsthand how our current system fails people. If you're truly committed to reform, to building something better, then you have my pledge. Mine as well. Another voice, this one female, Lady Rhiannon of the Northern Reaches. The sanctuaries in my territory are full of talented people wasting away because we've decided they're worthless. If you can change that, I'll stand with you. One by one, voices joined, not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. Enough to show that change was possible, that not everyone was content with how things had always been. Lady Isadora watched this unfold with an unreadable expression. Finally, she spoke. You've divided my peers, Your Majesty. That's dangerous. Or it's necessary, Kieran replied. Change is always divisive. But it's also inevitable. Perhaps. She inclined her head slightly. I won't support you. But neither will I actively oppose you, provided you prove that these reforms actually strengthen the kingdom rather than weaken it. Consider yourself on probation, both of you. It wasn't approved. But it wasn't outright war either. I'd take it. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Kieran and I worked late into every night, drafting proposals for sanctuary reforms, identifying positions in the royal household that could be open to people based on merit, planning initiatives that would demonstrate the value of what we were trying to build. Caspin thrived. With both of us present and committed, with the security of knowing I wasn't going anywhere, he transformed completely. He started lessons with tutors who actually understood trauma, made friends with other children in the palace, even began asking about his mother without fear that talking about her would make his father disappear. And slowly, painfully slowly, but undeniably, the kingdom began to change. The first sanctuary we reformed became a model for others. Rejected Omegas received training in skills that were actually useful, were given opportunities to prove their worth, were treated like people with potential instead of failures to be hidden away. The The first positions opened in the royal household based on merit were met with resistance, but the people who filled them proved themselves so capable that even the staunchest traditionalists had to admit the system worked. And I learned everything I could about governance and diplomacy and the complex web of politics that kept a kingdom functioning. I made mistakes, plenty of them, but Kieran was always there to guide me, to catch me when I stumbled, to remind me that being queen didn't mean being perfect. It meant being brave enough to try. 6 months after that day in the throne room, Kieran proposed officially. Not in front of a crowd, not as a political statement, but in the greenhouse among the moonflower roses where Caspian's mother had loved to walk. "Vesper Winters," he said, kneeling in the soft earth with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "You've given me back my life, my son, my ability to hope. You've made me believe in second chances and new beginnings. Will you marry me? Will you be my queen, my partner, my love, for whatever time we're granted?" "Yes," I said through tears. Yes to all of it. Forever. Caspian, who'd been hiding behind a rose bush, leaped out with a whoop of joy. "I knew it. I knew you'd say yes." The flowers told me. We laughed, pulling him into our embrace, the three of us surrounded by white roses that bloomed impossibly in the depths of winter. The coronation came 3 months later, a smaller affair than tradition demanded, but no less meaningful. I wore white to honor the woman who'd come before me, whose memory I'd honor, but never try to replace. As Kieran placed the crown on my head, lighter than I'd expected, but no less significant, I looked out at the assembled crowd. Some faces were still hostile. Some were calculatingly neutral. But others, more than I'd dared hope, were smiling, accepting, ready to see what this rejected Omega could do as their queen. "I promise to serve with compassion and strength," I said, my voice steady. "To honor tradition while building something new. To prove that worth isn't determined by birth, but by choices. And to show every rejected Omega in this kingdom that their stories don't have to end in exile. They can end in crowns." The cheers weren't universal, but they were real. And that night, as I lay in bed with my new husband on one side and my adopted son on the other, I thought about how far we'd all come. From a sanctuary of broken souls to the palace of new beginnings. From grief and isolation to love and family. From rejection to royalty. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, setbacks, moments when I'd question whether I was strong enough for this impossible task. But I wouldn't face them alone. I had Kieran, fierce and loving and committed to building something beautiful. I had Caspian, brave and wounded and healing more every day. I had a kingdom slowly learning that change wasn't death but evolution. And I had myself, no longer the rejected Omega who believed she was worthless, but a woman who knew that her gentleness was power, that her compassion was strength, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "I love you," Kieran whispered in the darkness. "Both of you. My queen.
My son.
My family." "Love you too, Dad," Caspian murmured, already half asleep. "Love you, Mom."
Mom.
The words settled over me like moonlight, soft, beautiful, perfect. "I love you both," I said. "Forever and always." Outside our window, the moon rose over the kingdom. Our kingdom now, full and bright and beautiful. And I knew with absolute certainty that we would face whatever came next. Together. The end. Moonlit souls, thank you for joining us on Vesper, Kieran, and Caspian's journey from brokenness to belonging. If this tale of rejected Omega to Queen touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and howl with our pack here at Wild Alpha Tales. Until the next moon rises, remember, your worth isn't determined by who rejected you. It's defined by who you choose to become. Stay wild, stay brave, and keep believing in second chances.